lamp is dim. The night presses close. Let me tell you what the old mountains still keep buried in their hollows, what the liquor jars and broken stills never confessed. These are the most disturbing, true Appalachian moonshiner horror stories. Each one whispered like a curse, each one sharp enough to draw blood if you dare to lean too close. The hollow was always whispered about in the way people talk when they are afraid of their own words, soft and half swallowed, as though speaking too loud would summon something listening. I grew up with those stories carried on the lips of old men who smoked hand-rolled cigarettes on front porches, their voices brittle as dry leaves when they warned, "Never wander down that way." They said no birds sang in that place, that even the crickets died silent if you lingered too long. I never believed them, not really. I thought it was just one of those tales the mountains keep alive to scare children from straying too far into the timber. But curiosity is a sickness in its own right, and it festered in me until I found myself walking deeper than I ever had, where the trees leaned in and close and the light turned cold. The air grew thick, damp, heavy with the stink of old mash and rot. My boots sank into mud blacker than oil, and the silence pressed against my skull until every heartbeat sounded like a drum in the dark. That is when I saw it. Half hidden beneath sagging timbers and briars, the still crouched like some long-forgotten beast waiting to be uncovered. The copper pot loomed out of the hollow earth, streaked green with age, its coil glinting dully beneath the weight of shadow. But what made my stomach turn and my throat go dry was not the sight of it, but the heat. I laid my palm against the cold metal just to prove myself braver than the tales, and nearly yanked back in shock. It was warm. No fire glowed beneath, no wood piled at its base. The pot sat alone, but a low thrum vibrated through it like a heartbeat too slow and too strong to belong to anything human. The hollow smelled of sour mash, but sweeter somehow, cloying in a way that made bile rise in the back of my throat. I stood there far too long, hand hovering over the warm copper, half expecting it to burst open and spill fire. The silence grew heavier, almost alive, as if the forest itself was waiting for me to take the first sip of something it wanted me to taste. Somewhere in that breathless dark, I realized the stories had not been born from fear alone. They were born from something real, something that had been left here long before I stumbled onto it. I should have turned back. I should have walked until the trees parted and sound returned. But I leaned closer instead, my breath fogging against the surface of that impossible heat. And that was when I heard it. A whisper, low and wet, seeping from the mouth of the still. It spoke my name. I should have left that hollow behind, let the silence swallow its secrets, and never looked back. But the whisper would not leave me. It followed me into sleep, curling at the edges of my dreams, repeating my name with a sweetness that burned. Days passed, then nights, and still the memory of that warm copper and the low hum beneath it gnawed at me like hunger. So I did what the old men warned never to do. I went back. The second time, I carried a lantern. Its weak light fought against the dark as I stumbled down into the hollow, the air colder than it had any right to be. My breath hung in clouds, drifting into the trees that leaned closer now, as though they wanted to watch. The still waited where I had left it, patient and unchanged. But the silence had thickened. The woods no longer felt empty. They felt occupied. I lifted the lantern higher, and the light caught on glass. At first, I thought it was the shine of bottles left behind by some forgotten shiner, relics of nights when laughter and liquor still meant warmth. But when I stepped closer, my stomach turned. These were not whiskey jars. They were stacked in crooked towers, leaning against the walls of the hollow as if arranged with care. Dust clung to some. Moss crept around others. But inside something moved. At first I thought it was a trick of the flame, the flicker of my lantern distorting shadows through the warped glass. Then one of the jars shuddered. Another twitched. I bent closer, my hand trembling as I lifted the lantern higher, and that is when I saw them clearly. Each jar was filled with a murky liquid, pale and viscous, and within floated shapes that writhed as though disturbed by my presence. Fingers, small and curled like they belonged to infants, pressed against the glass before slipping back into the sludge. In another, something with an eye, just one, wide and staring, rolled upward to meet mine, lidless and bloodshot, before sinking again into the depths. The sound came next. A faint scratching, soft at first, then louder, like nails dragging from the inside. The jars rattled against one another, lids pulsing as though they could barely contain what was inside. The air filled with the coppery stink of blood mixed with sour mash, and my throat closed tight with nausea. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the lantern, the flame inside leaping as if eager to escape the suffocating dark. And through it all, the whisper came again, low and steady, seeping from the still's mouth. It spoke my name, clearer this time, as though it had learned how to shape my syllables. The jars quivered in unison, as if answering the call. Something inside them wanted out. Something that had been waiting far longer than me. And the lantern flame flickered once, twice, before the hollow sank back into darkness. The lantern's flame guttered low, but I dared not breathe on it for fear of snuffing it out. The hollow was alive now, filled with the restless twitching of jars, the faint scrape of something clawing from inside the glass. I edged backward, eyes darting between the copper still and the grotesque towers stacked around me. That was when I heard it. A footfall. Slow, heavy, deliberate. It came from behind me, up on the path I had just stumbled down, the same path that had been nothing but empty earth and shadow. I froze, every hair rising along my arms, my ears straining through the silence that followed. Then came another step. The crunch of damp leaves pressed under weight. I spun so fast the lantern nearly slipped from my grasp. Its flame swung in a wide arc, casting trembling light up the narrow trail and into the clutch of trees that leaned like watching figures. Nothing. No one. Only empty path. Mud glistening, leaves slick with cold. My heart hammered, but I stood still, forcing myself to listen. The hollow held its breath, and for a moment I began to wonder if the sound had been in my head, another trick of that whisper curling out from the still. But then the footsteps came again. Closer. I felt it before I heard it. The weight of presence behind me, the ground trembling faintly with each step. I dared not turn again, afraid of what I might see, or worse, what I might not. My breath fogged before my face, trembling in the cold, and I clutched the lantern tighter until the metal handle cut into my palm. Finally, I forced myself to look. The path behind me was empty, nothing but shadows melting into shadows. Yet I could not shake the certainty that something stood there, just beyond the reach of the light, patient and waiting. The jars rattled again, louder this time, as though stirred by whatever stalked me. Shapes pressed harder against the glass, their blurred forms writhing, their muffled scratches now frantic. The whisper from the still deepened, no longer a hushed call but a low chant that curled around the hollow like smoke. Another step, this one so near the hair on the back of my neck lifted. I swung the lantern in desperation, its flame flaring as the light tore across the trees. Nothing moved, nothing stirred, but the sound of retreating steps filled the silence, slipping back into the timber as if the forest itself had swallowed the intruder whole. I was alone again. At least, that is what I wanted to believe. But the way the still pulsed, the way the jars shook as though in laughter, told me the truth. The hollow was not empty. It never had been. And now, it knew me. The silence after those footsteps was worse than the sound itself. My skin prickled with the memory of breath at the back of my neck, of something that had almost touched me. I thought maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the hollow was playing tricks. But then the jars began to stir. At first it was faint, a single tap like glass cooling in the night air. Then another, then dozens. The lantern light flickered against the crooked towers of jars, and I saw them shifting on their own. Liquid sloshed thick and slow inside, and the shapes within writhed harder, pressing against the sides. The lids began to bulge upward, metal straining as though whatever was inside was growing restless, hungry. I stumbled back, holding the lantern high. The scratching grew louder, multiplied, until it sounded like 100 nails dragging across glass. One jar toppled, rolling to my feet, and I froze as something inside slammed against the lid, hard enough to make it jump. The lid pulsed, bent outward as if a mouth were forming beneath the metal. That was when I heard it again. My name. Clear now, more than a whisper, but dozens of voices at once, tangled together. Some were deep and rasping, others shrill, childlike, broken. They came from every jar, each one carrying a different version of my name, as though they had practiced it 1,000 times in the dark. The sound clawed at my chest, dragging me toward them. I tried to look away, but my eyes caught on the horrors sealed within the glass. A hand, small and gray, fingers webbed together as though fused by fire. An eye staring without a lid, rolling beneath the syrupy liquid. A mouth opening and closing, no sound escaping. But the whispers were still there, pressing into my skull. I dropped to my knees, my lantern shaking so violently the shadows seemed to pulse with the rhythm of their chant. The jars rattled harder, stacked towers wobbling, lids popping upward in sudden jerks like they could burst at any moment. The voices rose, overlapping, urgent now, pulling at me like invisible hands. The still at the center of the hollow throbbed, a low metallic groan carrying from its belly, and the hum that had once been faint now roared in my bones. It sounded alive. It sounded aware. My name poured from every corner of that hollow, from the glass, from the copper, from the very air. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it only grew louder, pressing through my skull, curling beneath my ribs. The jars shook with such force, I thought the glass would shatter and spill whatever nightmare lived inside onto the ground. And then, with a sound like a sigh, every lid flexed outward in unison. They wanted out, and they wanted me. I did not wait for the lids to burst. The sound of them flexing in unison, the chorus of voices hissing my name, was enough to snap me from the trance. I turned and ran, lantern swinging wildly, its light carving frantic arcs through the trees. The hollow seemed to pulse behind me, the hum of the still rattling in my teeth, urging me to look back. But I did not dare. I only ran. The path clawed at my boots, roots snagging my ankles, branches ripping across my face. The forest leaned closer with every step, the air thick with the sour reek of mash, heavy and wet, almost drinkable. But beneath it was another smell, sharp and coppery. Blood, fresh, hot, seeping through the earth, like the ground itself had been butchered. I gagged as the scent coated my throat, burning like liquor swallowed wrong. Each breath was fire, each step slower than the one before, as though the path itself resisted me. Behind me, the jars rattled louder, the sound chasing me up the hollow. I could almost hear them tumbling free, shattering, spilling their contents into the dirt. I swore I heard wet hands slapping against the ground, dragging themselves forward, faster, closer. The whisper never stopped. It threaded through the trees, slinking around my shoulders, curling into my ears. My name again and again, rising from a chant into a scream. I clutched the lantern tight, its flame threatening to die with every stumble. And I thought, if it went out, the dark would take me whole. The smell grew stronger as I reached the ridge. Sour mash and blood mingled until the world spun, my vision narrowing to a tunnel of flickering light and suffocating stink. My lungs burned, my chest heaving. But still I climbed, desperate for the break in the trees where the night sky waited. Every step I expected a hand to seize my ankle, to drag me backward into that hollow where silence had teeth. At last the trees parted, and I burst into the clearing where the air was thinner, cleaner. I nearly fell, clutching at the lantern as though it were life itself. But even as I gulped the night air, even as I stumbled away from that cursed hollow, the smell clung to me. It seeped into my clothes, into my skin, into the very marrow of me. Sour mash and blood fused together into something that marked me. I knew with a certainty that hollowed my bones that I had not escaped. The path behind me was not empty. It breathed, it watched, and it waited. Because whatever lived in that copper still, whatever twitched inside those jars, it had found me. And it was not done. They used to say her liquor could kill quicker than a bullet. Men huddled around coal stoves, their faces blackened with soot and their lungs scarred from dust, whispering the tale of the widow who lived alone on the ridge. She brewed in silence, they said. Jars lined on her porch like teeth in a grin, each one glowing pale as moonlight. They warned never to drink from her hand, for her white lightning was not made from corn or sugar, but from something fouler, something she gathered when no one was watching. I laughed at those stories once. Every hollow has its ghost, every ridge its witch. Coal camps thrive on whispers, on stories that make long nights shorter and hard men shiver. But curiosity is a sickness, and the name of the widow festered in me until I needed to see her work with my own eyes. The night I went, the camp was quiet. Only the creak of timbers and the low moan of the wind dragging through the tipple. I followed a deer path up the mountain, lantern in hand, boots sinking into mud, slick with rain. The ridge loomed above me, trees tangled like black ribs against the sky. And all the while, I swore I smelled mash on the wind, sweet and sharp, laced with something like iron. By the time I reached her clearing, the night had gone too still. No frogs, no owls, not even the whine of insects. Just the low gurgle of liquid bubbling through copper, the steady drip of moonshine falling into jars. Her shack stood crooked at the edge of the clearing, the roof sagging, boards warped and gray. But the still was alive, glowing faintly in the dark, steam curling from its coils as though it had a breath of its own. Jars lined the porch, row after row, each one capped tight. The light from my lantern caught in them, and for an instant I thought they held not clear liquor, but something thicker, something that pulsed as if alive. I told myself it was only the glass playing tricks. But my stomach twisted with a fear I could not name. That was when I saw her. She stood in the doorway, tall and thin, wrapped in black that hung loose against her frame. Her hair spilled down in tangled ropes, glinting like wet coal. The lantern light touched her face, and I saw she was not as old as I expected. But her eyes were pale and empty. The color leached from them as though even her soul had burned away. She looked at me, and her mouth curled into something that might have been a smile or a warning. Then she lifted one of those jars. The glass sweating through the night was cold, and held it out to me. "Thirsty?" she asked. Her voice was sweet and low, but I swore it scraped like broken glass against my ears. And before I could answer, the smell hit me. Sharp, sour, and coppery, like blood boiled down to liquor. Her hand lingered in the air, the jar trembling slightly, though she held it steady, as if the thing inside was restless, straining against the glass. I should have turned, should have run down that deer path and never looked back. But her eyes pinned me to the earth. Pale and hollow, they promised I would not leave unless I took what she offered. So I reached out, my palm clammy, and wrapped my fingers around the cold glass. The jar sweated, beads of moisture running down its sides, even though the night froze my breath in the air. It felt wrong, as though the glass itself had veins, pulsing faintly under my grip. I lifted it closer to the lantern, and what I saw inside twisted my stomach. The liquid was not the clear, clean lightning I knew from other stills. It shimmered faintly, thick and pale, glowing like milk left too long in the dark. Worse still, it moved. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a ripple from my unsteady hands. But no, it throbbed. The liquid pushed against the glass in steady waves, beating like a heart. With each pulse, the sweating glass grew hotter, then colder, as though it breathed. The widow's voice slid through the silence. "That's a strong one. Don't open it till you're ready." I nodded dumbly, the jar heavy in my arms, heavier than it should have been. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth, but I forced words past it. "What's in it?" Her smile stretched thin, sharp. "White lightning. Nothing more, nothing less. Drink it and you'll never fear a thing again." She turned and slipped back into the shadows of her shack, leaving me alone in the clearing with the glow of her still and the weight of that cursed jar. My boots felt rooted to the ground, but I finally staggered down the path, the lantern bobbing in my other hand. Every step, the jar seemed to grow heavier, as if it knew I wanted to be rid of it and clung tighter to me. By the time I reached the edge of camp, my arms ached, my chest burned. The men were gone from the coal stoves, the night as silent as the widow's ridge. I set the jar down beside me in my bunk, telling myself I would pour it out come morning, smash it if I had to. But as I lay in the dark, I heard it. The faintest sound. A wet, steady beat. The jar pulsed in time with my heart, and with every throb, the smell of copper filled the room, thick enough to choke. And through the glass, muffled and low, something whispered. It whispered my name. I tried to ignore it. I really did. I turned my back to the jar, pulled the blanket to my chin, and told myself sleep would swallow the unease. But the sound would not stop. That faint heartbeat in glass, that steady pulse that matched my own. Every time my eyelids grew heavy, it would twitch louder, as if the thing inside was waiting for me to surrender. By midnight, I could stand it no longer. I sat up, lantern shaking in my hand, and stared at the jar as though it might leap from the floor and crawl into my bed. My fingers shook as I worked the cork free. The moment it loosened, the room shifted. A foulness rushed out that made my stomach wrench, a stench heavy and wet. the reek of rot layered thick with the sour bite of grave dirt. It filled the air so quickly I gagged, pressing my sleeve to my mouth. But it coated everything: the bunk, the boards, my skin. The jar quivered in my hand, the liquid inside rippling as though something had been waiting to breathe. Then it came. A hiss. Low, sharp, slithering through the dark corners of the room. My lantern light trembled, throwing shadows that seemed to stretch too far, twisting like hands reaching from the walls. The hiss grew louder, circling me though no shape revealed itself. My skin crawled, my ears straining, but it came from nowhere and everywhere all at once. The jar still pulsed, the liquid glowing faintly, and in its surface I swore I saw movement that did not belong to ripples or reflection. A face, or the beginning of one, pressed against the inside, mouth wide, eyes rolled white, lips pulling back as though it was trying to drag itself through the glass. The hiss broke into words then, a whisper stretched thin as smoke. I could not understand the tongue, but it coiled through me like a sickness, settling deep in my chest. The lantern flame shrank as though starved of air, and the darkness thickened, swallowing the corners of the room until only me and the jar remained. I dropped it onto the floorboards, praying it would shatter, praying the nightmare would spill and die. But it did not break. The jar throbbed harder, the cork rocking loose, that foul stench pumping out in waves. The hiss was closer now, right at my ear, though nothing stood there. I clutched the lantern, desperate, and swung the light across the room. The shadows recoiled for only an instant before surging back, crawling toward the jar, bowing toward it like worshippers at an altar. And all the while, the liquid inside beat faster. A rhythm not my own. Something alive. Something waiting. When the cork finally popped free, the hiss became a scream. The scream bled into the rafters, into the boards, into my very marrow, until I thought my bones might split apart from the sound. I staggered back, lantern rattling in my fist, light leaping wild across the room. The jar rolled once across the floor and came to rest in the shadows, liquid inside churning like storm water. That was when I saw her. She stood at the far end of the bunkhouse, half in the dark, half in the failing glow. Pale as the moon itself, her skin slick, glistening, as though she had just been pulled from the bottom of a black river. Her hair hung long, dripping strands that slapped against her dress in heavy ropes, the sound of water pattering where no water should be. Her eyes were hollows, not empty, but filled with something worse, clouded like milk, filmed with death. Her lips parted, and a trickle of water spilled down her chin, soaking into the collar of her faded black dress. Yet she smiled, and in that smile was no kindness, only hunger. Her hand stretched toward the jar, long fingers pale and swollen, nails blue as if frozen. I watched as drops fell from her fingertips and hissed when they struck the boards, leaving dark stains that spread like rot. The jar answered her. The liquid inside leapt to the glass, pressing outward like a thing desperate for its master's hand. The whispering filled the air again, but now it was not many voices. It was hers alone, sweet, drawn out, every syllable a hook snagging at my flesh. She called my name with such tenderness that for a heartbeat I nearly obeyed, nearly bent to pick up the jar and place it in her waiting palm. The lantern flickered and dimmed, its flame sputtering thin, and her figure lurched forward with the dark. Each step was a stagger, heavy with the drag of sodden skirts, each movement accompanied by the soft lap of unseen water. The boards beneath her feet creaked as if drowning under her weight. She was close enough then that the stench of her hit me. River mud, rot and sour mash all tangled into one suffocating wave. My throat closed around it, gagging. But I could not move, could not breathe. Her hand hovered over the jar, nails tapping against the glass like claws drumming a coffin lid. I wanted to shout, to pray, to smash the lantern and set the whole room aflame. But nothing left my lips. All I could do was watch as her drowned face bent low, milky eyes fixing me with a hunger that promised I would not leave whole. The jar pulsed, and her hand tightened around it. And when she looked up, still dripping, her smile had widened. She was not offering anymore. She was claiming. Her hand clutched the jar like it had always belonged to her. And in that instant, I understood what the stories never said aloud. The white lightning was not liquor at all. It was her. Her blood, her breath, her curse sealed in glass. If she held it, I would never leave that room alive. I lunged forward, snatching the jar before her dripping fingers closed around it. The liquid inside heaved like a living thing, slamming against the glass so hard the vessel quaked in my grip. My hands shook, slick with sweat, and I could feel the heat of it crawling through my palms, searing into my skin as though it wanted to burrow under my flesh. Her scream split the night then, a sound so piercing it cracked the lantern glass. The flame guttered, shadows flooding the walls like water surging into a sinking boat. She came at me, arms reaching, her hair spraying droplets that hissed when they touched the boards. I staggered back, clutching the jar, and knew I had only one choice. I dropped it. The glass shattered against the floorboards, shards flying, and the thick, pale liquid spread across the soil beneath the bunkhouse like blood blooming in water. For a breathless moment, all was silent, as if the world itself recoiled. Then the screaming began. It rose from the earth, from the liquid, from the very cracks in the wood. Not one voice, not even hers alone, but hundreds, men, women, children, howling, wailing, begging. The sound clawed at my ears, at my mind, filling me with a terror so deep I thought I might go mad. The floor trembled as though the ground beneath had opened, as though the jar had uncorked not just liquor, but something that had been buried alive. The widow fell to her knees, her pale face twisted, her mouth opening wide to pour out a scream louder than all the rest. Her hands dug into the soil, clawing at the liquid as it seeped downward, trying to gather it back. But the ground drank it eagerly. With each drop that vanished into the black earth, her body seemed to unravel, her form flickering like smoke caught in a draft. I stumbled to the doorway, clutching the broken lantern, choking on the copper stench that had turned the air to poison. Behind me, the screams rose higher, shredding the night sky until it seemed all of Appalachia must wake to their horror. And then, just as sudden, silence. When I turned back, the soil was black and wet, steaming faintly, the widow gone, her jar gone, everything gone. Only the smell remained, sour mash and blood, thick enough to choke. But even as I fled down the ridge, even as the night wind cut the sweat from my face, I could still hear them. The screams. They had not ended. They had only gone underground. The road twisted like a serpent through the mountains, blacktop cracked, the forest pressing close on either side. Midnight in Appalachia feels heavier than anywhere else. The dark thicker. The silence stretched so taut you can hear your own blood moving. My headlights cut two pale tunnels through the trees when they struck something that should not have been there. A sign. Rusted metal, leaning at a strange angle, letters half swallowed by moss. It pointed to a dirt track veering off the main road, though no such track was marked on any map I knew. I should have kept driving. Every instinct in me said so. but the way the light struck that sign made it look less like a warning and more like an invitation. My hands turned the wheel before I thought better of it, tires crunching gravel as I left the safety of pavement behind. The dirt road was narrow, hemmed in by trees that leaned over as though trying to hide what lay ahead. My beams caught on branches, clawing low, on shapes that looked like faces until the car moved again. Then, the clearing opened like a wound in the woods. My engine hummed, but the sound seemed wrong here, swallowed too quickly, as though the air itself was thick. The first thing I saw was copper, dull and hulking in the dark. A still. It stood whole and waiting, coils intact, firebox cold, yet a faint shimmer rose from the mouth as though it breathed. Barrels leaned around it in crooked circles, and the smell that clung to the clearing was sweet at first, like fermenting fruit before souring into something far less pleasant. My headlights washed across the still and glinted on glass. Rows of jars stacked against the stump of a fallen tree, lined neatly, almost reverently, as though waiting for someone to claim them. I cut the engine and stepped out. The night closed in instantly, and the sudden silence pressed against my ears so hard I thought I'd gone deaf. The gravel under my boots cracked too loud as I moved toward the still, drawn like a moth to its copper shine. That was when I heard it. A laugh. Thin, sharp, carried not from one throat but many, echoing as if the trees themselves had voices. It danced across the clearing, but when I spun toward the sound, there was no one there. Only the still, the jars, and the faint shimmer rising from the copper mouth. I told myself it was the wind. I told myself to turn back. But I kept walking forward, deeper into the clearing, deeper into a place the mountains had hidden on purpose. And the moment I crossed the circle of barrels, the air grew warmer, thick as breath. And the still gave a low groan, as if it had been waiting for me all along. The clearing breathed like it was alive. The air shimmered above the coils, waves of heat rising even though the night around me was cool enough to bite my skin. My boots sank into the dirt as I drew closer, and that was when I saw it. The still was not just standing cold and forgotten, as I first believed. Flames licked inside the firebox, steady and strong, orange light spilling against the copper belly and throwing shadows long across the barrels. The drip of liquid echoed steady into a glass jar below the spout, clear and relentless, like the heartbeat of the clearing itself. But no one was there. No wood stacked at the fire's side, no lantern hanging from the post, no figure stoking the blaze or watching the flow. Just barrels leaning inward, their lids sealed tight, and coils rattling faintly as though something unseen moved through them. I stepped closer. Lantern raised, but the flame inside faltered as though protesting the heat radiating off that copper beast. My own breath felt thick in my chest, sour with a stench of mash and smoke. I circled slowly, eyes darting from tree line to shadow, waiting for the shiner who should have been there. This was not the wreckage of some abandoned camp. The still lived, every part of it working in smooth precision, as if tended by invisible hands. The jar beneath the spout filled inch by inch, clear liquid catching the firelight. I thought of the men in camp, how they'd give anything for a taste, how they'd fight tooth and nail for shine this pure. But something in me recoiled, a voice deep in my marrow hissing not to touch it. The barrels groaned then, a low shift like old wood straining against nails. I froze, my light swinging over them. The sound came again, louder, and lids trembled against their seams. I knew that groan. Not the sound of oak flexing with age, but the hollow complaint of something moving inside. The laughter came back, faint but sharper now, like it threaded through the coils themselves. The fire roared hotter, though no one fed it, the copper glowing faintly red as though about to burst. The air thickened until sweat ran down my back, despite the chill around the clearing. I stumbled back, the dirt shifting beneath me. The still hissed, spitting a plume of steam that curled upward into the night. And for just a heartbeat, I saw faces in it. Gaunt, stretched, eyes black as coal dust, mouths open wide like they had drowned mid-scream. The vapor swirled, reaching toward me before breaking apart in the night air. My stomach churned. I looked back to the road, the safe black ribbon of escape. But the trees closed tighter now, as though the path had never been there at all. And behind me, the jar beneath the spout overflowed, clear liquid spilling across the dirt like veins branching outward, glistening as though it was hungry for my steps. The smoke curled higher, twisting in the firelight, and I realized the sound was riding inside it. Not just the crackle of flame, not the hiss of steam, but laughter. Thin, sharp, the kind that scrapes the back of your teeth and makes your skin tighten. It slithered through the clearing, never rising loud, just steady enough that I knew it was not in my head. I swung the lantern wildly, chasing shadows. Each time the light cut across the smoke, the sound seemed to leap, darting to another place, never letting me pin it down. Chest tightened, sweat dripping into my collar, though the mountain air should have been freezing. It was laughter without a body, without breath, as though the still itself was mocking me. The barrels joined in then, groaning and creaking until their lids rattled against the iron hoops. One tipped forward with a dull thud, then another, rolling in slow arcs like something inside shifted its weight. The smoke wrapped around them, tendrils seeping into the seams, and the laughter grew sharper, more layered, a chorus of voices overlapping in broken harmony. I wanted to run, but the road was gone. I turned where I swore it had been, but the tree line pressed close, thicker now, no gap between the trunks. It was as if the forest had sewn itself shut. My lantern flame stuttered, shrinking as though the air was thinning, and the shadows surged forward to meet me. The smoke rose in a column above the still, stretching unnaturally high, and I swear I saw shapes forming inside it. Not faces this time, but outlines. Bent figures hunched over, carrying burdens, staggering in a slow, endless march. They moved like miners dragging their tools, like men bound to labor long after their lungs had turned to ash. The laughter rose and fell with their steps, a cruel rhythm that made bile creep up my throat. I stumbled backward, my boot catching on a root, and fell hard into the dirt. The jar by the spout tipped, spilling clear liquid across my sleeve. It burned cold, soaking in fast, and the skin beneath tingled as though hundreds of tiny mouths were sucking at it. I yanked my arm away, choking down a scream, but the wet patch pulsed faintly under the lantern light. The laughter sharpened into a single note, piercing, drilling into my skull. I clutched my head, teeth grinding, and in that dizzying pain, I heard words inside the laughter. Not English, not anything I could understand, but the sound of it bent my name into its cadence. My name repeated again and again, until I thought it would carve itself into me. And when I looked up, the smoke had gathered together, coiling tight. At its center, two black pits opened like eyes, fixed directly on me. The laughter stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was expectant, waiting. The silence stretched until I swore the world had stopped breathing. My lantern flickered, its flame too weak to push back the dark, and the smoke thickened in the clearing like a storm gathering without wind. Then the shapes inside it began to sharpen, no longer outlines or tricks of the fire. Faces, They floated in the vapor, dozens of them, gaunt and sunken, their skin stretched thin across bones that jutted like knives. Mouths hung open in impossible grins, teeth too many, too sharp, as if laughter had carved their jaws into permanent smiles. And the eyes. God, the eyes. Each one black as coal dust, pits that swallowed light, endless and hollow, staring straight into me. The smoke swirled, carrying those faces closer, rising and falling with the hiss of the still. Some drifted above the barrels, peering down as if to mock me. Others pressed low against the dirt, their mouths opening and closing as though they were trying to breathe the earth itself. Their grins never faltered, their eyes never blinked. One floated inches from my lantern's glass, the heat distorting its features until the grin widened grotesquely, splitting almost ear to ear. I staggered back, but wherever I turned, another face met me. They filled the clearing, climbing higher into the night sky until it seemed the stars themselves had been replaced by their watching eyes. Then they began to move in unison, their mouths opening wider, teeth gleaming in the firelight. A sound rose from them, not laughter this time, but a long, rattling breath that shuddered through the clearing. It rolled like wind, but carried no chill, only heat, the kind that stinks of burning flesh. The barrels groaned with the same rhythm, their lids bulging upward, as if those faces were pushing from inside, desperate to claw their way free. I tried to run. My boots slid in the dirt, and the road should have been only steps behind me. But the trees leaned closer, trunks twisting until they formed a wall of shadow. The faces shifted with me, their black eyes following, their mouths shaping words I could not hear, but somehow understood. They wanted me to stay. They wanted me to drink. The jar at the base of the still filled again, clear liquid dripping steady into glass. I saw the vapor curl around it, faces pressing to the surface, their grins trembling with hunger. The laughter returned, sharp and thin, bursting from every mouth in the smoke. It rose higher and higher until the night shook with it. My ears rang, blood pounding hot. And in that madness, I realized the faces weren't drifting anymore. They were closing in. Their coal-black eyes locked on me, grins widening, their vaporous mouths stretching open as if preparing to swallow me whole. I spun, desperate for escape, certain I could force my way back to the blacktop if only I kept running. But the road was gone. Where there had been gravel and ruts just minutes before, now the tree line pressed tight, trunks knitted together in a wall of shadow. Branches curved down like claws, sealing me in, and the forest exhaled with the same sour stench of mash and smoke. The clearing was no longer a place I had stumbled into. It was a trap. My lantern flared weakly, light shivering against the smoke that now filled the air thick as fog. The faces drifted closer, their grins stretching impossibly wide, black eyes sinking into me like coals burning through paper. I backed away, my heels striking the rim of a barrel. The wood rattled beneath my weight, and something inside slammed back, a wet thud against the lid, eager, waiting. The still groaned, a deep, metallic sound that vibrated through the ground and into my bones. Steam hissed from the coils, the vapor writhing like snakes, carrying those gaunt faces with it. They circled the clearing, their laughter thin and jagged, as if the air itself was tearing apart from the sound. Each step I took only drove me deeper into their orbit, until the still stood before me like some ancient altar, its copper belly glowing with heat, though no wood fueled its flames. The jar beneath the spout filled again, clear liquid spilling over the rim to soak the dirt. Where it touched, the soil blackened, writhing as though alive. The vapor pressed tighter, the faces leaning in, their mouths opening wide enough to swallow me. I realized then what the clearing wanted, what the still demanded. It wanted me to drink, to take that jar in my hands, to swallow its poison until I became one of them, my face drifting forever in the smoke, grinning, laughing, lost. I shook my head, stumbling back, but there was no road, no path, no salvation. Only the still, only the faces, only the endless night stretching above me like a coffin lid. My breath came ragged, chest burning, my heartbeat matching the hiss of steam. The laughter swelled, a shrill chorus that rose higher, piercing, until it no longer sounded human at all. The faces pressed closer, their coal black eyes gleaming wet in the firelight. My lantern guttered, flame shrinking to a thread. And in that final flicker, I knew the truth. If I stayed a moment longer, if I let the dark settle over me, I would not leave that clearing. The road was gone, the forest sealed, and the still would claim me. My face would float in the smoke, grinning, black-eyed, joining their endless laughter. And someone else, someday, would follow a rusted sign into the mountains and find me waiting there. My grandfather's warnings always carried weight, the kind of words carved from the stone of old mountains and paid for in blood. He told me never to dig near the mash pit, his voice low, his eyes slipping to the window as if the pit itself might hear him. He never explained why, never spoke of what happened there, only muttered that it was where good men went sour and the earth had swallowed their sins. I should have listened. I should have left it buried. But curiosity is a hunger that eats at you slow, until the silence around a secret is worse than the truth. The pit was nothing more than a depression in the ground behind the woodshed, choked with weeds and brambles. The boards that once covered it had long since rotted, their splinters jutting like ribs from the soil. Even from a distance, the place had a smell, sour and sweet, like corn mash gone to rot, thick in the back of your throat. Every time I passed, I felt something waiting beneath the earth, pressing upward, patient and silent. One evening, when the air was heavy and the cicadas screamed louder than my own thoughts, I took a shovel and crept to the pit. My hands trembled even as I laughed at myself, telling my shadow not to be afraid of old dirt. I stabbed the blade into the soil, breaking the crust, and the ground seemed to sigh. The smell hit me first, so foul it drove water to my eyes. Not just rot, but something older, sharper, metallic and rank, like blood left too long in the sun. I gagged, but I kept digging, each scoop of soil looser than the last, damp and dark like the earth was sweating. My breath came faster as the pit widened, and the silence of the woods thickened around me. No cicadas now, no owls. Only the scrape of my shovel and the wet slap of earth falling away. Then the dirt gave in. The shovel sank deep, too deep, striking nothing solid. A hollow groan rose from the ground, a sound so low it rattled through my bones, and the soil shifted under my boots. I stumbled back as the pit sagged inward, the earth caving, opening like a mouth yawning wide after too long a sleep. The stench rolled out in a choking wave, sour mash mingled with decay so raw it burned my nostrils. I dropped the shovel, my heart hammering, my grandfather's words pounding in my skull. Never dig, never dig. But it was too late. The pit was awake, its breath heavy with rot. And from somewhere deep inside the hollow earth, I thought I heard movement, a scrape, a whisper, a promise that what I had unearthed was not meant to stay buried. Curiosity had ruined me, and the pit was not done. The ground caved inward, a sucking collapse that left the pit yawning wider, and the smell that rose from it made my eyes burn. It was not the sour bite of old mash anymore. It was thicker, heavier, as if the earth itself had rotted from the inside. My boots sank in when I stepped closer, the soil soft and wet, clinging to me like it wanted to pull me down with it. Each breath tasted of rust and mold, and the sound of shifting dirt echoed below, like something stirring just out of sight. I knelt and clawed at the muck with my hands, though my gut screamed for me to stop. The soil was too soft, too warm, as though it had been fed with more than rainwater and time. My fingers brushed against something solid, and for a heartbeat I thought it was a stone. But when I pulled it free, I felt the curve of it. Smooth, hollow, pale even in the dark. A bone. I froze, staring at it in my hand. A length of femur or arm, yellowed with age, yet somehow slick, as if it had not been buried long. My stomach twisted, bile hot in my throat, but I could not let go. I shoved the dirt aside, clawing deeper and more surfaced. Ribs tangled like brittle cages, a skull with empty sockets half filled with black soil. Fingers curled as though they had clawed for air before the earth swallowed them. The pit was full of them. Each shovelful of muck exposed more bones, layer after layer, packed together so tightly it was as if the earth had been fed flesh instead of corn. The smell of liquor clung to them faintly, mingling with the sharp stench of death, as if they had been steeped in mash before being sealed beneath. My lantern light trembled, casting the sockets in shifting shadow, and I could almost swear they stared back at me. I stumbled to my feet, dropping the bone, but it landed with a sound too wet, as though something still clung to it. The soil around the pile seemed to breathe, sinking and rising in shallow pulses. And for a moment, I thought I saw the bones shift on their own, sliding against each other like restless sleepers. My grandfather's warning slammed into my skull, heavier than the weight of any earth I had dug. Never dig near the mash pit. Not because of liquor, not because of lawmen, but because this was no place for the living. The wind died. The woods held still, every branch frozen, as if the mountain itself was listening. And in that dead quiet, I heard it again. A scrape, a shuffle, from beneath the bones. I staggered back, lantern shaking in my hand, as the soil swelled once more, pushing upward, as though the pit was not just giving up its dead, but birthing something new. The mound of soil shivered, bones clattering faintly as they shifted against one another. I held my breath, frozen, lantern light quivering over the pit. For an instant, I prayed it was just the weight of the earth settling, the collapse of rot and time. But then the ground bulged again, rising like something beneath it was pressing upward, pushing through the layers of muck and marrow. I leaned too close, too drawn by the awful movement, and that was when it happened. The earth split with a wet gasp, and a hand burst free. It clamped onto my wrist before I could flinch, its grip iron slick with filth that stank of liquor and decay. The touch was so cold it burned, and the texture of it was wrong. Skin sloughing under my fingers like wet paper, bones too sharp beneath the flesh. I screamed, but the sound choked off as the hand squeezed tighter, dragging me down toward the pit. I fell to my knees, clawing at the soil with my free hand, lantern swinging wild shadows across the clearing. The bones I had unearthed shifted again, grinding together, the skulls turning as though to watch. The hand tugged harder, its nails cutting into my skin, and I felt the pull of something deeper, a strength that was not just one arm, but the weight of everything buried below. I tried to tear free, kicking at the ground, wrenching my arm until my muscles screamed. The cold seeped through my veins, climbing up my arm, numbing my elbow, my shoulder, spreading like frost under my skin. I could feel the pit inside me. the sour reek of mash filling my chest, the weight of the dead pressing into my lungs. The soil shifted again, and another shape pressed upward, the outline of a face bulging against the earth, mouth wide as though screaming beneath the dirt. The whispering began, low at first, then rising. A dozen voices, then 100, each one overlapping, chanting words I could not understand. They spoke in gasps, in groans, in rattling breaths that made the ground itself vibrate. I swung the lantern. Down, the glass shattering, oil spilling across the muck. Flame flared bright for an instant, throwing the clearing into a storm of light and shadow. In that glare, I saw the truth. Not one hand, but dozens, pale and slick, clawing upward. Fingers broke through the surface around the pit, nails cracked and jagged, palms reaching for me. The one clutching my wrist pulled harder, dragging me forward so fast my chest struck the edge of the pit. My face hovered above the reeking soil, above the bones, shifting like they were breathing again. And in that final moment before the flames licked the oil, I realized the mash pit had not just been used to brew liquor. It had been fed. And now, it was hungry again. The fire spread fast across the spilled oil, but it did not burn the way it should have. The flames hissed low, crawling across the muck as though the soil itself was too wet, too rotten to catch. Smoke poured upward, thick and bitter, and in its glow, I saw them. The ground shifted, swelling in slow, heaving waves. Faces began to rise through the black muck, first faint outlines, then clearer, until their features pressed through like wax melting in reverse. Mouths sagged open wide, teeth broken, tongues swollen, eyes rolled white, blind and sightless, yet I knew they were staring at me. They did not look at rest. They looked hungry. Each face surfaced, groaning soundlessly, bubbles of fetid air escaping their lips as though they had been breathing the soil all along. Some tilted their heads upward, jaws working as if chewing. Others snapped their mouths open and shut, the sound of it wet, sharp, sickening. The skulls I had unearthed earlier seemed to sink back into the muck, replaced by these new horrors clawing their way up. The hand that gripped my wrist tightened, pulling me closer, and now more arms thrust upward, elbows bending, shoulders breaking free. Their bodies were slick and blackened, skin hanging loose, flesh fused with roots and earth, as if the mountain itself had grown them. They were not corpses. They were something caught between death and rebirth, dragged halfway into a world that did not want them. Their mouths moved in unison then, a chorus of hollow groans rising from the pit. The sound vibrated in the air, a pitch too low for words, but heavy enough to rattle my teeth. The faces bent toward me, mouths gaping, and I swore I could smell the rot of their breath, wet and sour, heavy with mash. The flames shrank against their presence, bending low, flickering like they feared to touch them. My lantern's last embers died, leaving me in the trembling glow of a fire that refused to spread. The muck bubbled thicker, popping with noises that sounded far too much like screams. One face surged higher, eyes bulging, its jaw snapping open wider than bone should allow, stretching until its lips tore. I thrashed, kicking back, trying to break free, but the soil beneath me gave way. My knees sank, the ground sucking me down, clinging tight as if eager to trade me for the dead, rising in my place. More faces surfaced, packed close, their blind eyes rolling, their mouths all opening toward me. They were not resting. They had never been resting. They had been waiting. And now, they were awake. The earth was swallowing me, hands clawing, faces pressing closer, mouths yawning wide like they meant to drink me down. I don't know where the strength came from. Fear, madness, something deeper, but I wrenched my arm free with a sound like tearing cloth. Skin burned where their nails had raked me, cold sinking deep into my bones. I staggered back, boots sliding in the muck, and for a moment I thought I was lost, that the pit would claim me like it had claimed the others. But something broke then. Maybe the last gasp of the flame, maybe the weight of their own hunger. The soil shuddered, sagged inward, and the faces began to sink, their mouths opening in groans so low they shook the air. One by one they slipped beneath the muck, their blind eyes rolling back, their jaws snapping shut on silence as the earth reclaimed them. The last hand released its grip, sinking back into the wet soil with a sucking sound, leaving only the churn of black mud behind. I stumbled away, heart hammering so hard my vision blurred. And then I was running. I tore through the woods, branches whipping my face, roots clawing at my legs. My lungs burned, my throat raw with the taste of rot, but I did not stop. I could still hear them behind me. Faint groans woven into the night air, the whisper of soil shifting under unseen weight. The mountain itself seemed to breathe with them, each exhale sour with mash, each inhale damp with graves. I do not remember reaching the house. I do not remember collapsing inside. Only the dark and the silence and the knowledge that I had brought their breath with me. For even as I lay there gasping, safe within four walls, the stink of that pit clung to me. Sour mash, sweet and sharp, twisted with the copper tang of blood and the damp chill of freshly dug earth. The days that followed blurred. My grandfather never asked, never looked me in the eye, but I swear he knew. I saw it in the way his hands shook when he passed the old woodshed, in the way he muttered prayers when the night grew too still. He had warned me, and I had ruined us both by digging where the dead had been brewed into silence. Even now, years gone by, I wake in the dark with my chest heaving, the smell wrapping around me like a shroud. Sour mash, damp graves. I hear the soft scrape of nails against glass, the faint groan of voices waiting under the soil. And in those sleepless hours, I know the truth. I never escaped the mash pit. It followed me, and one night soon it will call me back. They said he was a man like any other, until he wasn't. A backwoods shiner with calloused hands and a crooked grin, the kind you'd pass on a dirt road and never think twice about. But in the hollers, whispers grow fast, and his name was carried with them. They said his liquor never ran dry, that no matter how many jars he filled, the still poured more, as if the mountain itself bled shine at his command. Men swore they'd seen him carry only one jug into a gathering and pour the whole night long without it emptying. Women said his eyes gleamed like coal catching fire when the moonlight hit just right. I laughed at the tale the first time I heard it. Every town has its devil story, every ridge its cursed man. Folks love to blame the devil for hard times and too strong liquor. I thought it was nothing but a story stitched together by miners with too much shine in their veins. But laughter is cheap, and the mountains don't take kindly to those who mock what they keep buried. It was one autumn evening when I saw him for myself. The night was damp, the kind that clings to your bones, and I was walking the back road alone, lantern swinging by my side. The trees crowded close, leaves whispering in a language too old for me to understand. That was when I smelled it. Sweet, sharp, heady mash thick in the air. Not the sour stench of rot, but something almost tempting, almost holy in its pull. I followed it without thinking, as though the scent hooked a line straight into my lungs and reeled me along. The path bent downward, leading me into a hollow I'd never seen marked on any map. And there he was. He stood beside a copper still that glowed faintly, though no fire burned beneath. His back was to me, his shoulders bent as if whispering to the machine itself. Jars lined the ground in neat rows, every one filled to the brim with clear liquid that shimmered like starlight. I swear to you, I watched with my own eyes as the spout poured steady into another jar, though the barrels feeding it were empty. He turned then, slow, deliberate, and his gaze locked onto mine. For a moment, I thought it was only the lantern light playing tricks. But no, the stories were true. His eyes glowed, faint embers deep in their centers, as if some coal fire burned behind them. He smiled, and the air grew heavy, sweet and sour at once, making my head swim. He lifted one of the jars, the glass sweating though the night was cold, and held it out to me. "Care for a taste?" he asked, his voice low, steady, carrying the weight of something older than man. And though my gut screamed to turn and run, my mouth went dry. I stepped forward. The jar was heavy in his hand, the glass fogging faintly as though it held breath inside it. When he passed it to me, the weight startled me. It was not like a vessel filled with shine, light and quick, sloshing with promise. This one dragged at my arm, thick as lead, as if the mountain itself pressed down through the glass. I raised it to the lantern glow, and my stomach twisted. The liquid inside was no lightning. It was darker than midnight, so dark the flame could not pierce it. Yet when I tilted the jar, it moved sluggishly, thicker than molasses, leaving streaks clinging to the sides like black blood. The smell drifted out through the cork, sweet at first, cloying, like sugarcane on the boil. But beneath it lingered something sharp, copper and foul, the unmistakable tang of fresh iron. My throat tightened, as if my body knew what my mind did not want to admit. He watched me, his smile too steady, his ember eyes reflecting the faint shimmer of the still. "Go on," he said. His voice was low, carrying no urgency, but the weight of the words felt like command. "One drink? You'll never fear hunger or thirst again." The still behind him groaned, a low metallic moan that rippled through the hollow, like a beast stirring in its sleep. Jars lined at its base trembled faintly, the black liquid inside each one shivering in time with the sound. The air grew thicker, sweet and choking, filling my nose and coating my tongue as though I had already swallowed. My hand shook around the jar. I wanted to fling it into the dirt, to run until the mountain let me go, but the longer I held it, the harder it was to think of letting go. The darkness inside seemed to move, swirling lazily, shapes writhing just below the surface. At first, I thought it was a trick of the shifting lantern light. But then I saw it clearly. Fingers, pale and thin, pressing upward against the glass before sinking back into the black. My knees weakened, and I stumbled a step back. His smile did not falter, but his eyes flared brighter, coals stirring hotter. "Strong stuff," he said, his tone almost playful. "You won't find it anywhere else." The jar pulsed in my hands, the liquid inside thickening until it seemed to grip the glass, clinging to it, clinging to me. The smell wrapped around my throat, sickly sweet, metallic, damp with rot. And then, faint but certain, I heard it. A whisper rising from the liquid itself, curling against the inside of the glass. My name, spoken soft as breath, repeating with every sluggish ripple. I nearly dropped it then, nearly let it shatter on the stones. But the man's hand shot out, steadying mine with a grip too cold, too strong. "Careful," he said, his smile curling wider. "Spill it, and you'll waste the devil's gift." The jar trembled in my hands, the black liquid sloshing slow and heavy, whispering my name with every sluggish ripple. His ember eyes burned into me, and the still behind him moaned like metal alive. My body screamed to drop it, to run, but some force stronger than my will raised it to my lips. The cork gave way with a wet pop, and a wave of rot and sugar washed over me, sweet enough to choke. I tipped the jar. The liquid touched my tongue, and fire ripped through me. Not the fire of liquor, not the clean burn of shine, but something darker, crueler. My tongue blistered at once, as if I had pressed it to a coal, and the taste clawed down my throat. Ash. Bitter, thick, filling my mouth like a mouthful of cinders. Bone, the dry crack of marrow ground to dust, sticking to my teeth. And beneath it all, sharper than any flavor, came the sound. A scream. It did not come from my own throat, though I gagged and convulsed. It came from the liquid itself, shrieking as it slid down, voices upon voices woven together into a single note that rattled the hollow air. Each gulp carried not taste, but agony, as if I swallowed the last breath of something dying. My eyes watered. Bile rose, but I could not spit it out. The black molasses clung, thick as tar, forcing itself deeper. The man watched, his smile spreading as though the scream was music to him. The coals in his eyes flared bright, painting his face with shadows that seemed to move independent of the flames. He leaned close, his voice slithering against my ear. "There you go. You're part of it now." The liquid writhed in my throat, alive, and I clawed at my neck as if I could tear it free. But it pulsed downward, and with every beat, I heard another scream, felt another voice press into me, lodging in my ribs, my marrow. I saw faces then, not in front of me, but inside, behind my eyes. Hollow-eyed, mouths stretched wide, teeth bared in endless cries. Each one flashed and faded, replaced by another and another, until I realized what I had swallowed. Not liquor, not mash, souls. The taste coated me, filling every breath with ash, grinding in my teeth, rattling in my bones. My vision swam. The clearing tilted. The barrels surrounding the still rattled violently, lids bulging as though what I drank had stirred them awake. The jar slipped from my hands, shattering against the stones. Black liquid spread across the dirt, but even then, it moved slow and thick, curling toward my boots like it wanted me back. I stumbled away, gagging, my throat raw, my chest hollow. But still I heard it. The screaming, not fading, not gone. It was inside me now. The screaming inside me would not stop. It echoed in my ribs, scraped the inside of my skull, like every voice I had swallowed fought to claw its way back out. I staggered in the dirt, clutching at my throat, spitting black flecks that steamed when they hit the ground. My vision blurred, the lantern light smearing, and when I blinked through the haze, I saw him watching me. The man's grin had stretched too wide now, splitting his face in ways no human skin should. The coal fire eyes burned hotter, flaring red, and the shadows his body cast twisted and writhed as if they were alive. He stepped closer, slow and deliberate, and with each step his form seemed to sag. At first, I thought it was the smoke distorting him, but no, the flesh was melting. His cheek dripped like wax in a furnace, sliding down to expose something darker beneath. His jaw sagged, skin slouging off in ropes that slapped wet against his collar, until the lantern glow revealed bone that wasn't bone at all, but something rough, ridged, older than man. The embers in his eyes flared brighter, glowing, through the liquefying ruin of his face. His hair curled away in singed strands, his nose sinking into the sludge of his skin. What remained beneath was not hollow. It was carved like rock shaped in fire, horns curling slow and jagged from his brow. They gleamed black, slick with what used to be his flesh. and they rose higher with every breath he took. The screaming inside me seemed to answer him. My knees buckled, my chest searing, and still he smiled, though half his lips had already melted into nothing. His voice came low, rumbling from the thing beneath the disguise. "That burn you taste? That's the price. That's the promise. You'll never thirst again." His neck stretched unnaturally, the skin tearing to reveal muscle that smoked, pulsing with veins thick as roots. His shoulders broadened, hunched, and wings, God help me. Something like wings unfurled from his back, slick and leathery, dripping with the remnants of the man he had pretended to be. The clearing shook with the weight of his form, the still rattling like a toy beside him. I staggered backward, bile clawing up my throat, but my body was weak, my veins carrying that screaming liquor like poison. The barrels toppled, bursting open, black liquid spilling in waves, crawling toward him as though eager to return. Faces writhed in the shine as it spread, mouths gasping, eyes wide, souls he had kept bottled now writhing in worship. The last of his skin fell away in a wet slap to the ground, and what stood before me was no man at all. Horns curled high, eyes burning coals, teeth jagged and slick with shadow. The devil's face stared back at me, ancient, patient, hungry, and he was smiling. I fell to my knees, gagging, my throat raw with the screams that were not mine. The black liquid still clung to me, thick in my mouth, searing down my chest like molten tar. I clawed at the dirt, desperate to rid myself of it, desperate to force out what he had put inside me. My body convulsed, and at last I spat, the liquor spilling in a dark stream across the soil. The ground hissed where it touched, steam curling upward, carrying the stench of sugar and rot. At first I thought it was finished, that I had purged the devil's gift, that I had beaten it. But the earth beneath me trembled, a low shiver that grew into a pulse. Cracks split open in the dirt, spreading outward from the spittle like veins, glowing faint red as if fire burned deep below. The black liquor did not sink. It spread, soaking into the cracks as though feeding them. And then, from the fissures, the hands began to rise. They burst upward, pale and slick, fingers curled into claws. Some were small, too small, the hands of children. Others were twisted, gnarled, bones jutting through torn flesh. They clawed at the ground, at the air, at me. Nails raked my arms, my legs, cold, burning deeper than any flame. Each hand dragged itself from the split earth, pulling more of their bodies behind them, faces smeared. With ash, eyes wide and blind, mouths open in eternal screams. I tried to scramble back, but the soil gave way beneath me. Fingers snared my boots, gripping tight, pulling. The devil loomed above it all, horns gleaming, eyes burning, his grin wider than the sky. He did not move to touch me, did not need to. The earth itself was his snare, the ground opening like a jaw to swallow me whole. I screamed, kicking, tearing at the grasping hands, but they only multiplied, rising faster, layer upon layer of the damned. Their screams mingled with mine, the clearing filled with a sound of agony bottled and freed. The liquor I had spit out bubbled in the cracks, birthing more claws, more mouths, as if every drop carried another soul. The devil's voice rolled over it all, low and steady, the weight of centuries in his words. Once you drink, there is no undoing. You are part of the brew now, and the brew is endless. The ground yawned wide beneath me, a pit glowing red and black, the smell of mash and burning flesh pouring upward. Hands dragged me toward it, nails biting deep, pulling me down into the mouth of the earth. My last breath filled with ash and copper. My last sight was his burning grin. And the last sound was not my scream, but the chorus of the countless souls I had joined in the Devil's Brew. The trail had long since vanished behind me, swallowed by briars and fog, but I kept walking because some pull in the air refused to let me turn back. The Blue Ridge is full of odd silences, places where the forest holds its breath, and it was in one of those silences that I found it. A stone hut squatting low against the hillside, its walls dark with moss, its roof sagging under the weight of years. No door hung on its frame, only a black mouth yawning into shadow. I stood at the threshold, lantern in hand, and the hush inside pressed against me like a heavy quilt. No insects, no wind, just that deep, smothering quiet. I told myself it was a hunting cabin, a ruin from another century. But when I stepped inside, the truth sank into me. There it was, a still. The copper gleamed in the lantern light, not dulled by rust or dust, not broken like it should have been after so long abandoned. It sat perfect, whole, as though someone had polished it only hours before. The coil wound neatly, the pot round and strong, the spout angled toward an empty jar that waited on the stone floor. I felt my mouth go dry. I had seen stills rotting out in fields, collapsed and forgotten, but never one like this. Never one so silent, so untouched. I moved closer, my boots echoing faintly against the stone, and the sound seemed too loud, almost offensive in the stillness. My lantern's flame wavered, throwing jittering shadows across the walls, and for a moment it looked like the stones themselves were breathing. I reached out and laid a hand on the copper. It was cold, though the air around it carried a faint warmth, as if the machine had only just cooled. The silence deepened then, pressing into my ears until it roared. My heartbeat thundered, filling the void, and I felt watched, though no one stood in that hut but me. I pulled my hand back, but the still seemed to hum beneath my skin, a vibration that traveled up my arm into my chest. I staggered, blinking, and swore I saw something flicker in the corner of the room. A shape, a figure, gone before I could focus. The jar at the spout gleamed faintly, though it was empty. The silence swelled, too heavy now, too thick. My lantern sputtered, flames shrinking low, and I realized the hut had no smell, no dust, no damp, no sour mash, nothing at all. It was silence made into a place. And yet, as I stood there, trembling in that breathless dark, I could not shake the thought that the still was listening and waiting. For me. The silence in that stone hut pressed so hard into me that even the sound of my breath felt like a trespass. I lifted the lantern higher, its glow trembling against the damp stone walls, and that was when I noticed it. The copper wasn't clean the way I first thought. It gleamed, yes, but not from polish. Its surface was wet, beaded over with a sheen that caught the light. Droplets slid down the curve of the still as though it were sweating in the stagnant air. I reached out before I could stop myself, brushing my fingertips across the metal. The touch sent a shiver through me. It wasn't just damp. It was slick. Too slick, like oil mixed with sweat. The stuff clung to my skin, leaving a faint shine that glistened when I turned my hand in the lantern light. My first thought was condensation, maybe moisture from the mountain pressing through the stone walls. But the air inside was heavy and dry, warm in a way that made no sense. The copper shuddered under my touch, almost too faint to notice, like the deep hum of machinery running somewhere far underground. I pulled my hand back, wiping it on my trousers, but the slickness refused to fade. My skin tingled, tiny pinpricks running up my arm, and I felt an ache settle into my teeth, sharp and sour. The air grew thicker as I stood there, filling my lungs with weight. Each breath came slow, dragging in heat that shouldn't have existed in a place with no fire. My lantern sputtered, flame bending low, as though pressed upon by some unseen weight. The jar at the spout gleamed again, but it wasn't empty now. A thin sheen coated its bottom, dark and syrupy, though I hadn't seen a drop fall. I stepped closer, heart thundering in my chest, and the silence deepened until I thought my ears would burst. The copper was alive with moisture now, the beads running in rivulets, dripping faintly onto the stone floor. I heard the drops, sharp and distinct, even though no other sound should have carried in that suffocating hush. Each one rang out like a nail driven into wood. When I lifted the lantern again, the shadows warped across the walls, bending into shapes that weren't mine. Figures hunched and twisted, their faces turned toward the still, their mouths stretched wide in silent cries. The sweat dripped faster, glistening trails running together, pooling at the base until it looked as though the still itself was bleeding. My throat closed, panic rising, but I could not move. I could only watch as the copper trembled under its own weight, alive with that slick sheen. The silence quivered, thick with promise, and in that moment I knew. Whatever coated the still was not sweat. It was something the mountain itself had wrung out of the dead. The slick sheen on the copper ran in rivulets now, dripping faster, pooling black on the stone floor. I stood frozen, lantern trembling in my hand, when the silence broke. Not with a sound from outside, not with the creak of the hut or the sigh of wind through trees, but from inside the pot itself. At first it was faint, a tremor beneath the hush, like a sigh too soft to catch. I leaned closer, against all sense, my breath fogging the slick metal. And then I heard it clearly. A voice, low, rasping, dragging each word through grit and ash. "Drink," it whispered. I staggered back, lantern nearly slipping from my hand. My chest rattled with the weight of it, the words sinking into my bones. It wasn't just sound, it was hunger, a command wearing the skin of a plea. The copper pot vibrated under the voice, a slow thrum that rippled through the floor. I shook my head, muttering no, but the whisper only grew clearer, threading through the air like smoke. It spoke again and again, each time softer, more insistent, begging with the tone of a dying man pleading for one last kindness. "Drink, please, drink." I lifted the lantern high, peering into the pot, though every part of me screamed not to. The flame bent low, shadows clutching at the rim, and inside I saw movement. Not liquid, not mash, but a swirling darkness like smoke trapped in glass. Faces bloomed and faded within it, mouths opening and closing in mute agony, eyes rolling white before sinking back into the black. Their whispers blended into one, a chorus of thirst and promise. "Drink. Free us. Drink." The air pressed heavier, so thick it felt like a hand around my throat, shoving me closer. My lips dried, my tongue cracked, and though I had no thirst before, now my body cried out for it, aching with a need that wasn't mine. The jar at the spout shimmered, no longer coated but filling, drop by drop, each bead of dark liquid striking glass with an unnatural clarity. I wanted to flee, to throw down the lantern and crash through the trees, but my boots held fast to the stone floor, as though the mountain itself pinned me there. My hand rose without my command, trembling, reaching toward the jar. The copper pot groaned low, its voice threading through me, rattling my ribs, scraping down my spine. "Drink," it begged again, softer now, desperate. "You are chosen. You will carry us." The jar was half full, the liquid thick and black as tar, swirling with faces that pressed against the glass. They mouthed my name now, silent yet undeniable, each one knowing me, calling me. And in that suffocating silence, I felt the truth lodge itself in my chest. The still wasn't just brewing liquor. It was brewing souls. The whispering throbbed through the copper, each syllable pressing tighter against my skull until I could no longer tell if it was sound or thought. My hand, slick with sweat and that oily sheen from the still, slid against the metal rim as though guided by something other than me. I told myself I wouldn't look. I told myself I'd rather burn my eyes out than see what writhed inside. But the silence had a gravity, and it pulled me in. The lid was cold under my fingers, colder than the mountain air, though the copper beneath it still shivered with unnatural heat. The hinges creaked, slow and dragging, as though reluctant to yield. The moment the seal broke, the hut exhaled. A stench rolled out so thick it coated my tongue. Not the sour tang of mash, but something older, rancid, wet with decay. I gagged, but I could not step back. My lantern wavered, flame shrinking to a trembling bead, yet I forced myself to lean forward, to peer into that black throat of the still. What looked back froze me. It wasn't liquid. It wasn't vapor. It was a face. Pressed against the inside curve of the copper, the features warped and stretched by the metal, was the visage of a man. His eyes were wide, pupils lost, rolled in a terror that had no end. His mouth gaped, frozen in a scream that had never found its way out. The copper held him like a mirror of agony, skin smeared thin, jaw twisted until it seemed broken. For one awful second, I thought it was reflection, some trick of shadow and light. But then it blinked. The eyes rolled to meet mine, their whiteness seared by tiny red veins, and the face pushed outward against the copper, warping the lid as though it might break free. The scream that followed did not come from his throat. It came from the still itself, a deep, metallic wail that filled the hut, the stones, the air, rattling my bones until I thought they'd splinter. More faces appeared. One beside him, then another, all pressed tight against the copper, mouths wide, eyes rolled, each locked in that same endless scream. Their skin rippled together, overlapping, sinking and rising, as though the still was their prison and their grave. My lantern dimmed to near nothing, their faces glowing faintly in the dark, lit from within by some pale, unholy fire. The lid shook in my hand, the hinges straining. The air swelled, hot and heavy, whispering louder, urging me to drink, to join, to carry. The jar at the spout filled faster now, dark liquid spilling over, pooling on the stones. In its surface, I saw my own reflection waver, my mouth already stretched wide, my eyes already rolled white. And in that moment I knew. The still wasn't content to hold them forever. It was choosing me as its next vessel. The faces pressed harder against the copper, their mouths yawning wider, their screams folding over each other until the sound filled every inch of me. My skull felt too small, my ribs too tight, the whispering rising like smoke inside my lungs. The jar at the spout overflowed, black liquid creeping across the floor, lapping at my boots, clinging like tar. I stumbled backward, the lid trembling in my grip, the still groaning as if it would split open. The lantern died with a sigh, leaving only the glow of their pale, twisted faces lighting the dark. My chest seized, breath scraping raw, and I did the only thing I could. I ran. I wrenched myself from that suffocating silence, bolting for the doorway, boots splashing in the thick spread of liquor. The faces followed, stretched long against the copper walls, their eyes rolling to watch me as I fled. The hut shook, its stones quivering as though the mountain itself tried to close its jaws around me. I burst out into the night air, gasping, the fog clinging cold against my sweat. The forest opened wide, crickets shrilling, leaves rustling like they had been waiting to breathe again. Behind me, the hut loomed in silence, the doorway gaping black. I turned, half expecting to see the faces spilling out after me, the jar shattering against the ground, the still dragging itself into the trees. Instead, the doorway groaned. The stones shifted, grinding together like teeth, and the opening sealed shut. Mortar spread where none had been, vines curled fast and tight, weaving across the wall until nothing remained but a seamless face of rock. The hut was gone. I blinked hard, heart battering, but there was no trace. No hut, no still, only trees. The ridge sloped as though it had always been that way, roots twisting up from the earth, the night alive again with wind and insect song. My boots sank into damp leaves, where only moments before stone had stood. I staggered back, staring at the hollow space where silence had swallowed me whole. My skin still tingled with the copper's slick sheen, my mouth still carried the taste of ash and iron. Every shadow between the trunks seemed to lean closer, watching. The forest no longer felt like it had welcomed me back. It felt like it had spit me out. I tried to tell myself it was a fever dream, a trick of isolation and fog, but the smell followed me. Heavy, sour like mash gone to rot. No matter how far I walked, no matter how deep I breathed the mountain air, that stench clung to me. And when I close my eyes at night, I hear it again. The whispering plea, the copper groan, the faces pressing against the still. They beg, they scream, and they call my name. The hut may be gone, the still may be buried, but it is waiting for me in the silence. The clearing was empty when I stumbled on it, though the air was thick with the kind of heat that lingers after fire. At first, I thought lightning must have struck, or some hunter's careless flame had licked through the brush. But there were no charred trees, no ash on the wind. Only a single barrel stood in the center, its iron hoops blackened, its staves glowing faintly as though embers still lived deep inside. Smoke curled in thin ribbons from its seams, yet no flame showed itself, no spark, no flicker of light. The smell hit me next. Not wood smoke, not sour mash, something heavier, fouler, that dragged bile up into my throat. It was the unmistakable stench of burnt hair, of seared flesh, a scent I knew too well from farm accidents and stories whispered by men who had seen war. The odor clung to the clearing like fog, thick and oily, burrowing into my clothes, my skin, my lungs. I crept closer, though my stomach twisted and begged me to turn away. The ground around the barrel was blackened, damp with some slick residue that gleamed in the half-light. Each step stuck faintly, as though the earth itself had melted into tar. My lantern cast the barrel in a trembling glow, and I saw that the wood wasn't simply burned. It was scarred, gouged from the inside. Something had pressed outward with violence, splintering the staves, leaving jagged cracks where the smoke now seeped. I told myself it was just an old moonshiner's disaster. Maybe a still gone wrong, a mash fire too hot, a barrel that burst and burned a man to nothing. But if that were true, where was the ash of his bones? Where were the scraps of cloth, the tools, the bottles? The smoke thickened the closer I leaned, and in it I thought I saw shapes. Not just the curl of vapor, but twisting figures, faces half-formed, mouths open as though gasping for air. They drifted upward, stretching, before breaking apart into nothing. The smell grew sharper with each tendril, until I gagged and staggered back, my eyes watering. A sound followed then, low, muffled, coming from inside the barrel. At first I thought it was the pop and crack of wood cooling, but no, it was too steady, too deliberate. A groan, drawn out, wet and heavy, as though the charred staves strained under something still alive within. My lantern trembled in my grip, the flame bending low as if pulled toward the smoke. My breath came fast, ragged, and I could not stop staring at the barrel's seams, glowing faint red from the heat that would not die. Something inside was moving, and I realized, with a cold that cut through the stench and heat alike, that whatever had burned in that barrel was not finished. The smoke curled upward in thin black ribbons, stinging my eyes, and I lifted the lantern higher, desperate to see what the barrel was hiding. The glow caught on the scorched wood, and for a moment I thought the surface was only split and scarred from the fire. But as I leaned closer, heart pounding, I realized the marks weren't random. They were deliberate. Names. Carved deep into the staves, layer upon layer, the barrel was covered in them. Some cut shallow, others gouged so deep the wood splintered. The letters ran in jagged lines around the circumference, climbing over each other until the entire surface was nothing but words. They were not neat, not ordered, but frantic, desperate scratches like someone had clawed them in with shaking hands. I traced one with my finger, the grooves hot beneath my touch. The letters warped where the wood had burned, but the names remained legible, as if the fire had refused to claim them. Dozens, maybe hundreds, each one a mark of someone who had stood here before me. My lantern flickered, flame shrinking low, and I squinted to read the nearest. My breath froze in my chest. It was my name, not just the family surname, carved with an uncertain hand, but my full name. Letters exact, as though etched by someone who knew me, someone who had waited for me. My knees weakened, and I staggered back, lanterns swaying wild shadows across the clearing. The smoke thickened with my movement, curling tighter, dragging the stench of burnt hair and flesh deeper into my throat. I ran my hand over the staves again, frantic, and found more. Names of my kin, names I knew from headstones scattered in the family plot. Names my grandfather used to mutter in stories, men and women who had gone into the hills and never returned. Each one cut into the wood, preserved against the fire. Their memory burned into the barrel's very bones. The groaning from inside grew louder, a wet rumble that made the earth quiver beneath my boots. The names seemed to pulse with the sound, their carved letters darkening as though ink bled fresh from the grooves. My lantern's flame nearly guttered out, leaving the glow from the seams themselves, the faint red simmer of heat that would not die. I pressed my palm flat against the barrel, heart hammering, and the wood burned hot under my skin. The names thrummed, and in the smoke curling from the cracks, I saw faces, not strangers, familiar. My bloodline staring back at me, mouths open in silent screams, eyes blind with ash. The barrel was not a vessel for liquor. It was a tomb, and my name had been waiting there, carved long before I ever arrived. The names on the staves throbbed with heat beneath my hand, and the smoke grew thicker, curling around me like it wanted to bind me to the barrel. I stumbled back, clutching the lantern tight, when a sound rose above the crackle of cooling wood. A dull creak, low but steady, like pressure straining against iron hoops. The lid shifted. It was slight at first, only the faintest rise, but I saw it clearly in the lantern's trembling glow. The round of scorched wood lifted and settled again, the way a chest rises with breath. My mouth went dry, the stench of burnt flesh gagging me. And then I heard it. Not groaning, not the whisper of steam. Teeth. The sound came sharp and wet, grinding against one another, too many, too close. The gnashing filled the barrel, rattling against the wood, each snap of jaw harder than the last. It was not one mouth, it was many. The iron hoops groaned as though something inside pushed outward, jaws working furiously, chewing at the very air. My lantern sputtered, shadows leaping, and in those jagged shapes I saw them. Faces, half formed in the smoke, mouths opening and closing in perfect rhythm with the grinding sound. Their teeth gleamed faintly, slick, even as their eyes remained empty pits of ash. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it did nothing. The sound burrowed into me, vibrating through my bones, rattling my jaw until I thought my own teeth would crack. The names carved into the staves seemed to writhe, the letters twisting, curling into shapes that were no longer human. My name among them pulsed brightest, each stroke of the carving glowing red. The lid jolted again, this time higher, as though struck from beneath. The gnashing grew louder, frenzied, desperate. Splinters broke loose, snapping outward with each slam, and I realized it was not just chewing. It was hunger. The thing inside was not grinding its own teeth. It was grinding through the wood, wearing it down with every bite. The smoke thickened until it pressed into my throat, choking me with the taste of singed marrow. My knees shook, my lantern slipped low, and in that dim glow, I saw the lid rise once more, enough that I glimpsed the black inside. A row of teeth shone there, jagged and wet, layered too deep for any human mouth. The grinding stopped suddenly, cut short in a silence so complete, it roared. Then came a single sound, sharp and final. A snap. As if the barrel had bitten down, sealing its hunger for now. But I knew from the way the lid trembled, from the way the names pulsed like open wounds, that the chewing had only just begun. And when the barrel finally broke, it would not be content to eat itself. The gnashing quieted, though the silence it left behind felt worse, like the pause before a predator strikes. The barrel's lid trembled faintly, the iron hoops groaning under strain, and smoke poured through the cracks in slow, deliberate coils. I lifted my lantern higher, though the flame faltered against the thickening haze, and watched as the smoke rose not like mist, but with shape and intent. Faces. They surfaced in the curling gray, half-formed at first, then sharp enough to recognize. Hollow eyes and gaping mouths stretched wide, every feature twisted as though pulled from the moment of death. The first face leaned close to me, its lips moving through the smoke made no sound. But when the whisper reached my ears, it was clear, cutting straight into me. It spoke my name. And then it spoke my sin. Not some secret crime, not blood on my hands, but the small, quiet betrayals I thought no one remembered. The lies I told as a boy, the debts I never repaid, the promises I broke when no one was looking. The voice carried each one like a confession, dripping with a scorn that hollowed me out. Another face rose beside it, and another, each whispering in turn. Every wrong I had buried, every shame I had carried, they poured them back into me, sharp and undeniable. My lantern shook in my hand, the light jumping across their shifting features. And I realized they weren't strangers. These were the names carved into the wood, the family I thought lost to the mountain. Their whispers rose together, not pleading, not forgiving, but accusing. The smoke filled my nose, my throat, thick with the stink of burnt flesh, and their words crawled into my skin until I thought I would split open under the weight of them. I stumbled back, but the haze followed. Pressing close, the faces stretching long as they leaned toward me. One mouth opened wider than the rest, jaw cracking until it seemed ready to unhinge, and it whispered the deepest sin of all. The thought I had buried so far down, I believed it dead. The thought of leaving, of turning my back on blood and soil, of abandoning the mountain that had given me everything. The whisper shook me, rattled me, because it was true. And the smoke, did not forgive. The faces circled, weaving tighter, their whispers building into a chorus that clawed through me. My knees buckled, the lantern clattered to the ground, its light snuffed out beneath the rolling gray. The clearing vanished, swallowed by their judgment. The barrel groaned louder, the lid bulging, as if their hunger was stirred not by flesh, but by guilt. And in that crushing dark, I knew the truth. The barrel had not burned my family's names into its staves. They had burned themselves there. And it would not rest until mine was seared into it too. The whispers clawed at me, thick as the smoke that pressed into my lungs. And I knew if I stood there any longer, my name would burn itself into the wood alongside the rest. My hands moved before thought could catch them, seizing a rock from the blackened ground. With a roar I didn't recognize as my own, I swung it down against the barrel. The iron hoops groaned, sparks leaping where stone met metal. Again I struck, my palms splitting open, blood slicking the rock. The smoke shrieked with every blow, faces unraveling into screams that rattled the trees. At last, the hoops snapped, one by one, and the staves buckled outward with a wet, tearing crack. The lid split apart, and the sound that escaped was not wood breaking. It was breath. A long exhale, hot and sour, reeking of flesh and mash and blood. From the broken ribs of the barrel, something shifted. Not a body, not bones. Something black and slick, crawling, dragging itself through splinters as though the vessel had been a womb. It was formless at first, a tangle of smoke and sinew, claws scraping the dirt, teeth glinting wet where no mouth should be. It surged toward me, not running, not slithering, but moving in jolts, unnatural, as though it flickered between shapes with each heartbeat. My lantern lay, shattered on the ground, and the only light came from the faint red glow pulsing within the thing itself, as though the names carved into the wood now lived inside it, burning like coals. I stumbled backward, gagging, until the trees swallowed me. The clearing vanished behind fog and smoke, but the sound followed. Wet claws against stone, teeth grinding in hunger, the smell of charred flesh thick in the night air. I ran until my lungs tore open, until the world blurred. But still I felt it crawling behind me, unhurried, patient. By the time I reached the edge of the woods, the night was silent again, save for the rasp of my own breath. The clearing was gone. No smoke, no fire, no barrel. I told myself it was over, that I had destroyed it. But the stench clung to me, sour and sharp, refusing to wash away. That was weeks ago. Yet in every dark corner of my house, I hear the scrape of claws. At night, the gnashing of teeth rises faint and steady just outside my window. And in the mirror, when the lantern light burns low, I see smoke curling behind me, faces pressed against the glass, whispering my name. I smashed the barrel, but it birthed something instead of killing it. And now, whatever crawled free follows me home, waiting for the night I am too tired to run. The shack leaned like a drunk against the trees, half swallowed by kudzu and rot. Its boards were gray, brittle, the kind of wood that sighs when you press too close. I should have kept walking. But there was a pull in the air, that curious weight the mountains sometimes carry, as if something is waiting just for you. My lantern beam cut through the cracks and shadows, and I stepped inside. The air was damp, heavy with iron, a stink that clung to the back of my throat. The floor sagged under my boots, the boards soft with mold. But what stopped me cold was the shape hulking in the center of the room. A still, squat and whole, its copper belly blackened by time. I had seen a dozen in my life, ruined and abandoned, but never one like this. This one wasn't empty. The pot was filled to the brim with liquid red as blood. At first, I thought it must be the lantern's reflection, some trick of rust or dark mash catching the flame. But when I leaned closer, the truth hit me. It wasn't shine. It wasn't mash. The surface rippled thick and slow, gleaming deep crimson, the color too rich, too alive. The smell of iron swelled sharper, unmistakable now. A metallic tang that belonged in a slaughterhouse, not in a moonshiner's pot. I stumbled back, gagging, but my lantern's light followed me, dragging the glow across the copper, across the surface of that red brew. And I swear to you, it pulsed. A faint throb like a heartbeat. The liquid shifted in slow waves, not from wind, not from touch, but from within itself, as though veins ran through it, carrying life where there should be none. The shack seemed to breathe with it. The boards creaked, not with the weight of age, but in rhythm with that pulse. Shadows thickened in the corners, pressing closer, until I thought I heard them whisper. Low, wet murmurs that rose and fell like the gurgle of liquid in a throat. I told myself it was impossible, that someone had filled the still with dye, with paint, with some trick meant to frighten off wanderers. But the truth settled heavier with every breath I took. This wasn't a trick. This wasn't mash. It was blood. The longer I stared, the more I swore I saw faces ripple beneath the surface, features stretching, mouths opening as though trying to rise. My skin prickled, my throat closed, and I backed into the wall, desperate for the air outside. But the still stood patient, waiting, the red liquid gleaming under my lantern, pulsing slow and steady like it had been alive for centuries. And in that moment, I knew. This was no man's shine. This was a vessel for something that had been feeding and would feed again. The still loomed in the shack's center like some swollen heart, its copper belly breathing heat, though no fire licked beneath it. I stood frozen, lantern trembling in my grip, as the red liquid inside stirred on its own. First a ripple, faint and lazy, then a swelling churn that broke the surface in slow bubbles. They rose fat and heavy, bursting with wet sighs that echoed too loudly in the cramped room. No flame, no heat, and yet the pot seethed as though fed by some hidden furnace. The smell grew sharper, filling my lungs until I gagged. Not the sour tang of mash, not the sweet bite of corn liquor, but something coppery, metallic, thick with memory. I knew that smell. Every hunter knows it, every butcher, every man who has bled more than he should. It was the stench of blood. The bubbling quickened, froth curling at the rim, dark red foam sliding down the copper sides. My lantern light caught on the streaks, making them gleam like veins alive and pumping. Each bubble popped with a sound too wet, too deliberate, like a wound sucking air. The whispers in the corners swelled, threading through the bubbling, muttering in voices I almost recognized. Tones of kin long gone, of neighbors buried deep in mountain soil. My knees locked, refusing to carry me closer, but my ears strained toward the sound. Between the gurgles, I swore I heard words, faint and broken, the kind a drowning man makes when begging for air. The copper pot groaned, its seams straining, and a bead of red sweat rolled from a rivet, sliding down to drip on the floorboards. Where it fell, the wood hissed, blackening like it had been branded. The bubbling thickened, rising louder, until the shack quaked with the sound. The air pressed close, hot and suffocating, my skin slick as if the still itself exhaled against me. And then, beneath the churn, I heard it. A steady rhythm, faint but sure. A heartbeat. The liquid wasn't just boiling, it was alive. I staggered back, my shoulders slamming the wall, and the lantern flame shrank small, as though starved of air. The faces beneath the surface grew clearer in the dim glow, their features stretched in agony, mouths opening and closing in time with the bubbling. Their eyes rolled white, their expressions locked in silent screams. One bubble rose larger than the rest, swelling slow, its surface smooth and glistening. It pushed upward, wobbling, until it seemed it might burst free of the pot. I braced, bile rising in my throat, certain it would spray me in heat and blood. But it didn't pop. It pulsed. Once. Twice. Like something inside pressed against it, waiting for the right moment to break through. The shack moaned around me, the walls sagging inward, the heartbeat quickening. And in that thick stench of copper and rot, I knew I wasn't standing in front of a still. I was standing before a vein, and it was about to open. The red liquid churned inside the still, bubbling without fire, throbbing with that unnatural rhythm. I should have turned and fled the moment the stench thickened my breath, but something drew me closer. My lantern shook in my grip, its glow shivering across the copper belly of the pot. Droplets slid down the side, gleaming dark as garnet, pooling on the warped floorboards that hissed with every touch. Against all reason, my hand lifted. The copper was slick, wet with that impossible sweat. The instant my skin brushed it, the bubbling stilled, as though the pot itself held its breath. The silence was worse than the noise. The air collapsed heavy and close, pressing on my chest until I thought my ribs would splinter. Then the voices came. They rose not from the corners of the shack, but from inside the pot itself, carried through the copper into my hand, into my bones. A chant, low and guttural, words broken and sharp, not English, not anything I had ever heard from the living. The sound was older, deeper, a tongue carved from stone and ash, as though the mountains themselves had spoken before men had words. The chant built in rhythm, each phrase punctuated by the throb of the liquid within. My lantern flickered wildly, casting faces across the walls, faces that weren't mine, weren't human, hollow-eyed, long-jawed, mouths pulled wide as though the chanting dragged them open. They mouthed the same words, syllables spilling in a cadence that sank into my marrow. I tried to pull my hand away, but my skin clung to the copper, as though it had fused, slick, binding me there. My veins throbbed in time with the pot, each pulse pulling me deeper into that chant. The voices layered over each other, countless and crushing, until I thought I'd drown beneath them. Through the chant, one sound rose above the rest. My name. Twisted, broken, yet clear. My name chanted in that tongue too old for my ears, reshaped into something monstrous. The faces on the walls leaned closer, mouths stretching wide, and I felt the heat of their breath, though nothing stood before me. The bubbling surged again, furious now, the surface of the liquid rolling in violent waves. A spray of red splattered against the copper lid, hissing as it struck, and I swore I saw eyes blink within it before the drops slid back down. The voices reached a crescendo, a roar that shook the shack, shook me, until the floor groaned and split beneath my boots. Blood seeped through the cracks in thick rivulets, crawling toward me like veins branching outward. My heart hammered in terror, but it beat in time with the chant. And in that dreadful synchrony, I understood. The still was not a machine for brewing. It was an altar. And the chant was not asking me to drink. It was claiming me as its sacrifice. The chant rattled through me until my teeth ached, until I thought the marrow in my bones might splinter from the weight of it. My hand tore free from the copper with a wet sound, slick and burning, and I staggered back. The bubbling rose again, furious now, the liquid inside the pot heaving like a storm tide. My lantern sputtered, flames shrinking, shadows crowding in. At first, I thought the darkness belonged only to the corners of the shack. But then I saw them move. Faces, pressed flat against the gloom, their features stretched thin and sickly, eyes wide and rolling white, mouths open in silent wails. They swam in the shadows like fish in deep water, their outlines blurring and reforming, but their attention was fixed on me. Their hollow stares pierced the dim glow of my lantern, as if light meant nothing to them. A tap came sharp against the glass of a window to my left. Then another. I turned and saw more faces pressed there, fogging the glass with breath I should not have been able to hear. Their mouths opened and shut in the same rhythm as the chant still thrumming from the still. I could not hear them over the roar inside my skull, but I felt the words forming on their lips. My name. Over and over. Every window was filled with them now, pressing tight against the glass, their foreheads smeared against the panes, eyes bulging, skin stretched too thin. Some cracked wide smiles, their teeth blackened and wet, while others wept red tears that slid down the glass in trails like veins. The shadows thickened, crawling higher across the walls, their faces rippling into the wood, stretching long and hollow. The shack groaned with the weight of them, boards bending inward, nails creaking. It felt as if the entire structure was being drawn toward the still, dragged closer by something at its center. The bubbling grew louder, more violent, until the liquid splashed against the copper walls, streaks of red flying upward. A bead struck the ceiling and dripped down, landing on my hand. It burned cold, not hot, searing through skin until my flesh tingled numb. The faces pressed harder against the windows, their mouths gnashing now, leaving trails of spit and blood against the glass. The sound of their teeth clattering echoed faint and sharp, joining the chant. I stumbled back toward the door, my lantern nearly dead. But every shadow leaned with me, stretching long fingers, twisting faces, each one mouthing my name like a promise. When the last light guttered, the windows went black. Yet I knew the faces hadn't vanished. They had stepped inside, and the shadows no longer clung to the corners. They reached for me, closing in from all sides. The shadows closed on me, pressing from every corner, every window, every seam of the shack. Their mouths gnashed, their eyes rolled white, their whispers braided into the steady chant that filled my skull. I threw myself at the door, shoulders splitting against rotten wood, and stumbled out into the night. The air outside was no kinder. The trees leaned close, their branches heavy with faces that hadn't been there before, eyes glaring, mouths open as though the forest itself had joined the chorus. I ran, blind and stumbling, branches clawing my skin, roots dragging at my boots. The chant followed, low and relentless, pulsing in the soil beneath my feet, in the veins pounding in my temples. Somewhere behind me, the still groaned. The copper walls bellowed like a living thing, and I knew if I turned, I'd see the shack drag deeper into the mountain's heart, swallowed whole by what it had birthed. I didn't dare look. I ran until my chest split with fire, until the taste of blood filled my mouth, until the world spun and pitched me hard into the dirt. The chant dimmed, but never left. I pressed my hands over my ears, curled into the leaves, and begged the mountains to leave me in silence. When the sun rose, I staggered upright. The forest was still. Birds sang. Wind shifted through branches that now looked harmless, ordinary. My body shook as I found my way back, tracing the path by instinct, certain I'd find the ruin of the shack, the gleam of that cursed still, the stink of iron still wet in the air. But when I reached the place, there was nothing. No shack, no copper, no sign that anything had ever stood there. Only trees, tall and unbroken, the ground thick with moss that bore no track of my boots. The hollow was as quiet and untouched as if it had been sealed away for centuries. I laughed, sharp and hollow, telling myself I'd lost my mind, that it was nothing but fever and fear. But when I raised my hands to my face, the truth hit me harder than any chant. They reeked of iron. The smell of blood clung to my skin, seared into the creases, stronger than sweat, stronger than dirt. No matter how I scrubbed them in the creek, the stench lingered, raw and metallic, crawling into my lungs until every breath carried it. Even now, in the daylight, the memory thrums through me. My veins beat in time with something that isn't mine, something that still whispers in the back of my skull. The shack may be gone, the still may have vanished, but I carry its mark. And every night since, I've woken with the taste of iron on my tongue, certain that one day soon, the mountains will come to claim the rest of me. They said he was older than the mountains, a man who had walked into the woods one winter and never walked out. Folks whispered he brewed shine so pure it burned clear through your soul, a liquor that bound time itself. He was called many names: the Watcher, the Stillman, the Hollow Man. But the story was always the same. He never aged, he never died. I grew up hearing it in porch talk and firelight tales, nothing more than a folk tale to scare children from wandering too deep after dark. I told myself that for years, until the night I went too far into the trees. The air was sharp with autumn, the ground damp with rot, when I found myself walking paths I didn't know, trails that wound back on themselves like a snake eating its tail. My lantern cast a feeble glow against the trunks, each one too close, too tall, the bark gleaming damp as though the woods had been sweating. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. No crickets, no owls, just my boots pressing into the leaves, and a silence thick enough to choke on. Then I felt it, a presence, not sound, not movement, just weight. The kind of pressure that crawls between your shoulder blades and makes you turn though nothing's there. My lantern swung wide, shadows leaping, and that's when I saw him. At first, he looked like nothing but another tree trunk, long and narrow, still as stone. But then he shifted. His outline peeled away from the bark, and I caught the gleam of eyes. Not bright, not glowing, just dark, deep-set watching. His body was tall, too tall, draped in clothes I couldn't place. Not new, not old, but worn thin as if they'd been stitched from years themselves. I froze, my heart battering, but he didn't move closer. He just stood there, half in shadow, the weight of his stare pinning me where I stood. My breath fogged in the air, and for a moment I swore the mist bent toward him, pulled by something I couldn't see. I whispered, "Who's there?" Though my voice sounded foreign, small. He didn't answer. He only raised one hand, long fingers curled, and pointed deeper into the woods. My lantern flickered, shrinking low. But the path behind him seemed to stretch open, a corridor of trees darker than night itself. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run, but my legs betrayed me. I stepped forward, and as I did, his mouth opened, slow and silent. No sound escaping, only the shape of words I couldn't read. The Watcher did not move again. He only waited. And I realized the old stories had been wrong. He wasn't a man who never aged. He was something the woods had kept alive because it needed him. And now it needed me. The woods had a way of swallowing sound, but that night they felt emptier than usual, hollowed out as if the world had gone deaf. I followed the trail deeper, lantern clutched tight, the glow trembling with each breath. The trees leaned over me, their branches knotted like ribs, and the Fog dragged low along the ground, pale and clinging. My skin prickled, the weight of unseen eyes pressing heavy. And then I saw him. He stood between two black oaks, taller than any man had a right to be. His frame narrow but stretched, draped in clothes that hung like funeral cloth. His eyes glowed faint in the dark, not like fire, not like reflection, but steady, round, lantern-like, casting a dull sheen across the leaves. They fixed on me without a blink, cold and patient, as though he had been waiting there all along. My lantern faltered in my grip, its flame guttering, but I could not move. The glow from his eyes was enough to hold me still. He did not speak, but the silence thickened around him until it was a voice of its own. The forest seemed to retreat, sound folding into nothing, shadows bending closer to his frame. For a moment I thought the lantern light had shifted, but no. The glow was his. It pulsed faintly once, twice, the same rhythm as a heartbeat. Each time I felt it inside me, my chest tightening, my breath catching, as though his light had reached into my lungs and claimed the air there. I whispered, "What are you?" But the words didn't feel like mine. They fell dead against the silence, swallowed before they could echo. His eyes flared brighter, just a shade, and the fog at his feet stirred, curling upward as if drawn to him. Faces flickered in it, hollow, stretched, mouths open wide. They rose and fell with the pulse of his eyes, silent mouths mouthing words I dared not hear. He lifted one hand then, long and thin, fingers pale as bone, and the air shifted sharp. My lantern went out. The woods fell into blackness, save for his glowing eyes, steady, unblinking, burning holes through the night. I stumbled back, my heel catching on a root, and still his gaze never wavered. He did not chase. He did not step closer. He only watched, the fog curling tighter around his legs, the shadows drawing in like he carried the night inside him. The stories said he never aged, never died. They called him a man, cursed or blessed, bound to the woods. But as I stared into those lantern eyes, as my own heartbeat bent to their rhythm, I knew the truth. He was not a man at all. He was the woods, wearing a shape, watching, waiting. And now his gaze was fixed on me. His lantern eyes dimmed to a steady glow, the forest exhaling in that strange rhythm that felt too close to my own pulse. I stood trembling, the dark pressing tight around me, when his long arm moved. From the shadows, as though it had always been waiting there, he drew out a jar. He held it with care, both hands wrapped around the glass as though it was something sacred. The shape was ordinary enough, the kind you'd see filled with clear shine in any mountain hollow. But this one was wrong. The jar sweated though the night was cold, and when he stepped closer, I felt the air bend colder still. He extended it toward me, silent, patient, his glowing eyes never leaving mine. I hesitated, but my body betrayed me. My hands rose as if guided, my palms meeting the weight of the jar. It was heavier than it should have been, dragging at my arms, the cold of it biting into my skin until my bones ached. The glass thrummed faintly, a vibration that traveled into my chest, sinking with the slow, dreadful beat of the woods around us. I lifted it into the lantern light glow of his eyes, and the contents shifted sluggishly. Not shine, not mash. Something black, thicker than tar, rippling in lazy folds. It clung to the glass as I tilted it, sliding with a reluctance that made my stomach twist. The smell seeped out around the cork, sharp and sour, but beneath it was something older, metallic, coppery, the stink of old blood. I shook my head, whispering no. But the sound died in my throat. His gaze burned into me, unblinking, unchanging. the weight of it more commanding than any voice. The woods bent closer with him, branches arching overhead, the fog tightening at my legs as though the whole mountain leaned in to watch. The jar pulsed in my hands, once, twice, the same rhythm as his eyes. My grip nearly slipped, but I couldn't let go. The glass clung to my skin, slick with its own sweat, and the black liquid swirled as if alive, pressing against the cork. For the first time, he moved his mouth. His lips parted, and though no sound came, I felt the words inside me, as though they had been spoken directly into my marrow. Drink. The fog surged higher, wrapping me waist-deep, faces blooming faintly in its folds. Their mouths opened in silence, echoing the command, their hollow eyes locked on me. The jar grew colder still, so cold it burned, my fingers stiffening around it. My chest ached, my breath sharp, and I knew in that instant what he was offering was not liquor, not life, but a binding. The watcher did not speak again. He only waited, lantern eyes pulsing, while the black liquid inside the jar whispered against the glass, begging to be let in. The jar throbbed cold in my hands, each pulse sinking deeper into my arms until I thought the marrow itself might freeze. The black liquid shifted as though it had a mind. Sluggish ripples circling the glass. I tried to keep my eyes off it, to fix on the watcher's lantern glow, but the pull was too strong. Against my will, I lowered my gaze. That was when I saw myself. My reflection floated in the dark, pale and hollow, features warped by the sluggish movement of the liquid. At first, it was only distortion, the sort you see in creek water when the current bends your face. But then it changed. My mouth split wide into a grin, teeth too sharp, too many. My eyes sank black, glowing faintly red at their edges, the same ember fire I had seen in his stare. I staggered back, but the jar clung to my hands, fused to my palms with a chill so fierce it tore the breath from me. My reflection laughed inside the liquid, silent but cruel, lips curling upward though mine trembled shut. It leaned forward, pressing against the glass from the inside, fogging the surface with breath I should not have seen. The watcher never moved, never spoke, but his lantern eyes flared brighter, as though feeding on my fear. The forest groaned with him, trees bending closer, the fog wrapping high at my chest, carrying faint faces that opened their mouths in wide, silent screams. The jar grew heavier, dragging at my arms until my shoulders ached. The reflection pounded faintly against the glass, each grin wider than the last, each time twisting more of my features into his. My skin prickled, the cold biting deeper. And for one heartbeat, I felt my own lips curl against my will, stretching into that same grotesque smile. No, I hissed, but the word rang hollow, swallowed by the woods. My reflection shook its head slowly, its smile deepening, mocking me. Behind it, more faces surfaced, each one mine, each grinning wide, each waiting. The liquid pulsed harder, thrumming in time with the watcher's stare, the rhythm tightening around my ribs. My reflection mouthed a word, lips dragging slow across teeth, and though no sound came, I knew it. Drink. The cork bulged, pressing upward, and the faces in the fog leaned closer, their hollow eyes fixed on me. My chest heaved, my pulse erratic, but the jar refused to let go. And in that moment, staring into the black liquid that held a version of me smiling where I could not, I understood the truth. The jar wasn't meant to hold liquor. It was meant to hold me, and it was already trying. The jar pulsed in my hands, my reflection grinning wider with every heartbeat, the black liquid pressing harder against the cork as though it would burst. The watcher's eyes glowed steady, lanterns burning holes through the fog, waiting for me to obey. The forest bent with him, branches curling inward, the faces in the mist opening their mouths in silent command. My name rippled inside the glass, mouthed by that twisted reflection. I could not hold it anymore. With a cry that tore my throat raw, I hurled the jar against the stones. It shattered in a scream, glass exploding outward, the black liquid splashing thick across the ground. It hissed where it struck, spreading fast like tar, and in the muck I saw faces writhe, my own among them, stretching, smiling, then sinking into the soil. The forest groaned in rage, trees shivering, the fog thrashing as if a storm had torn through. The watcher did not flinch. He stood tall, eyes dimming only a shade, his mouth curling just enough to reveal the hint of teeth. His gaze fixed on me, unwavering, patient. Even with the jar broken, even with the black liquid hissing into the ground, his stare burned into me, deeper than flesh, deeper than bone. I stumbled back, boots sliding in the muck, the fog parting reluctantly. My breath came ragged, my chest tearing with each inhale, but I ran. I don't remember the path, only the sensation of branches striking my face, roots grabbing at my legs, shadows slipping between the trees faster than I could move. The glow of his eyes followed, steady, never rushing, never fading. Lanterns in the dark, always just behind me. When I finally burst from the tree line, gasping beneath the sickly dawn, the woods fell still. Birds sang, the fog burned away, the jar was gone, the muck was gone. For a moment, I told myself I was free. But I was wrong. That night, when the lantern light in my home burned low, I felt him. The weight between my shoulders, the hush pressing into the walls, the stillness where sound should be. I turned to the window, and there, deep in the tree line, two faint glows stared back. Not fireflies, not lanterns, eyes, his eyes. It has been every night since. No matter where I go, no matter how far I travel, the woods follow. The glow waits at the edge of the dark, steady, unblinking. My reflection in the glass grins wider with each passing evening, teeth sharper, eyes sinking blacker. I threw the jar, but it didn't matter. The watcher does not need it. He has me. And every night, I know his lantern eyes will burn until mine match them. The river was swollen with rain, its current dragging foam across the rocks like teeth grinding bone. I should not have been out there after midnight, but the woods had a way of drawing me when the world above grew too heavy. The moon rode high, pale and sharp, laying silver across the water. And that was when I saw them. Coils of copper, half buried in the mud at the bank. They gleamed unnaturally, as though freshly polished, though the river had no kindness for metal. The shapes wound in loops, too perfect, too deliberate, stretching from the shallows to the roots of an old sycamore. At first I thought some careless shiner had abandoned a rig, left it to rot when the revenuers came sniffing. But the air was wrong. The closer I stepped, the heavier it grew, thick with a smell not of mash or yeast, but of something raw and metallic. The copper reeked faintly of blood. I crouched and reached out, hesitant, my fingers trembling just above the surface. The coils thrummed faintly, vibrating as though the river itself were singing through them. I drew my hand back quick, but the sound clung to my skin, a ringing deep inside my bones. The current slowed where the coils touched, eddies circling backward, rippling against the natural pull of the river. The water darkened there, deep and strange, reflecting not the moon, but something red, as if the coils had dragged another current from beneath. I leaned closer, lantern shaking, and swore I saw shapes moving under the surface. Not fish, not logs. Faces, pale and drifting, mouths open wide as though they had drowned screaming. The river's voice changed. It no longer roared against stone. It whispered. Low and steady, carrying from the copper itself, words slurred by water, but sharp enough to sting. I could not understand them, but the rhythm was unmistakable. A chant, patient and hungry, threading through the coils. I stumbled back, boots sinking in mud, my heart hammering too loud against the hush of that unnatural voice. The river stretched wider in the moonlight. Black as oil, the coils gleaming like veins that had burst from the earth. For a moment, I thought the current leaned toward me, as if the whole river bent with intent. The faces beneath the surface stirred closer, pale eyes opening. Their mouths moved in unison, and though no sound rose above the water, the words burned in my skull. My name. The copper hummed louder, and the river whispered it back to me over and over, until the bank seemed to tilt forward, drawing me toward the dark. The moonlight stretched thin across the coils, and I knew then what I had found was no still abandoned by some backwoods shiner. It was a mouth, and the river was teaching me how to listen. The copper coils pulsed in the mud, each ring alive with a vibration that gnawed into my bones. I stepped back, lantern lifted, but the river refused to let me go. Its surface shivered, rippling outward in widening circles, and then the color changed. It began as a faint tint, like rust bleeding from stone, but soon the entire current churned red. Not brown from mud, not the rusty hue of clay runoff. This was darker, thicker. The smell hit next, sharp and coppery, burning the back of my throat. Blood. My lantern light shook across the water, and what it revealed froze me cold. The river carried no fish, no branches, no debris, only streaks of crimson swirling in its belly, moving against the current as if something below stirred it from beneath. The foam that once gleamed white was now stained pink, each bubble popping with a sound too wet, too deliberate, like lips smacking. The coils gleamed brighter as the water darkened, each loop catching the moonlight until they glowed like veins alive under flesh. The thrumming grew louder, no longer just a vibration, but a note, deep and steady, like the beat of a drum. The chant returned, threading through the sound of the water, its words clearer now, though I dared not repeat them. The river swelled high, lapping at the bank where I stood, and droplets spattered my boots. They were red, thick, clinging. The smell of iron filled my lungs till my stomach clenched, bile rising. But still I could not step back. The faces beneath the surface were closer now, their eyes open, rolling, mouths mouthing words beneath the bubbling tide. One rose higher than the rest, a pale shape that broke just below the surface. Its lips parted, froth spilling, and for a moment I swore I saw a tongue inside, black and swollen. The water shuddered, and it sank again, dragging streaks of red behind it. I staggered backward, nearly dropping the lantern, but the river followed. The current surged higher, spilling over the bank, dragging coils of copper upward with it. They writhed like snakes, glistening wet, sliding toward me, with purpose. The chant pounded in my ears now, louder, crueler, a demand rather than a whisper. My name wove through it, again and again, a command to step closer, to kneel at the water's edge. The red froth reached my ankles, soaking my boots, cold and sticky. I gasped, jerking back, but the coils tightened, the ground trembling with their movement. The river was no longer a river, it was a wound, and it had opened wide to bleed before me. When the first pale hand broke the surface, fingers long and dripping, I realized the river was not offering me a drink. It was asking me to join it. The river roared louder, its waters churning red, pulling at the coils until they writhed like veins torn loose from the earth. I stumbled backward, lantern flickering wild, when something heavy struck the bank with a hollow thud. Then another, and another. Barrels. They bobbed on the crimson current, their wood swollen and dark, staves splitting from long years in water. They floated sluggishly, bumping the banks with dull knocks, as if carried there on purpose. Each one rolled with a weight inside, a muffled slosh that was not liquor. The nearest barrel wedged against a rock, its lid shifting under the current. A smell rolled out, stronger than the copper tang already choking the air. Sweet, cloying, the stink of rot that had lingered too long in wet earth. My lantern light caught on the surface of the liquid, seeping from its seams. Not whiskey, not mash. Something darker, thicker, clinging to the wood like oil. I bent closer, against all reason, and pressed the light toward the crack. The barrel's insides glistened. Something pale pressed against the gap, soft and slack, sliding against the wood. Flesh. I recoiled, bile clawing my throat, but the river carried more barrels, each one knocking gently against the others as though they had been guided there. One drifted close enough to touch. Against my better sense, I reached with the lantern. Inside, a hand floated limp, skin gray, fingers curled like claws. It twitched once, then fell still. The barrels shifted, bumping harder, their lids bulging. The sound of wood groaning filled the river's voice, each pop and creak a heartbeat out of time with my own. The current slammed one barrel against another, and the lid of the nearest burst upward, spilling its contents into the red froth. Bodies. Not whole, not clean. Pieces. Pale limbs tumbling into the current, torsos bloated, heads with mouths gaping wide. The river took them, spun them, carried them along until their shapes blurred into the froth. My lantern light shook with my trembling, but I couldn't look away. The barrels cracked one by one, spilling their loads, the banks filling with pale shapes that bobbed against the roots. And then came the voices. Not whispers now, not chants, but groans bubbling from the barrels themselves, pressed through wet wood, moaning low like wind through hollow logs. They rose in unison, carried on the current, threading into the rhythm of the river until I could no longer tell if it was the water speaking or the dead inside. The copper coils pulsed brighter, the chant swelling, the barrels bursting like fruit rotted too long on the vine. Hands dragged across the surface, reaching upward, grasping blindly. I staggered back, lantern nearly falling, heart tearing my ribs. The river had fed me its secret, and the barrels knocking against the banks were not abandoned. They were offerings, and the river wanted more. The barrels cracked and split, spilling their pale burdens into the froth. And as the pieces vanished into the current, the river changed again. It rose slow at first, a swelling tide that lapped against the banks, sucking at the mud with greedy pulls. My boots sank deep, the ground softening, as if the river were drawing everything closer. And then came the voices. They didn't whisper this time. They sang, low and mournful, rising from beneath the surface, weaving through the churn of red water. It was not music as we know it, no tune or words I could place, but a long-drawn note that trembled like a dirge. The sound sank deep into my chest, hollowing me from the inside, making my heart stumble and fall into step with theirs. The copper coils gleamed brighter with each verse, glowing hot against the dark, their loops vibrating like the strings of some grotesque instrument. The song threaded through them, bending the air, until it felt like the very bones of the mountain hummed along. The trees bent inward, their leaves trembling without wind. the whole forest straining to listen. The river climbed higher, pulling bodies and broken barrels against the roots, staining the trunks with streaks of crimson. The faces beneath the surface drifted closer, mouths open wide, singing without breath. Their eyes rolled back white, but they never broke rhythm, their pale throats convulsing in harmony with the river's voice. I clutched the lantern to my chest, its glow no match for the rising black. But I could not move. The song froze me, each note a hook dragged through my veins, my name threaded faintly through it, stretched and drawn out until it no longer sounded human. I felt my lips twitch, parting, my throat straining to join them. The ground gave beneath me, mud sucking harder at my boots, the river licking higher with every breath. My lantern shook, flame shrinking as if starved for air, and in its dying glow, I saw the figures rising. Not just faces, not just hands, but whole shapes heaving from the current, their mouths still locked in that mournful hymn. They dragged themselves free of the water, skin pale and glistening, hair tangled with riverweed. Their eyes did not see me, but their voices bound me, their song pressing into my skull until I thought my bones would split from the sound. The coils pulsed again, and the song changed. The dirge deepened, shifting from sorrow to hunger, the kind of tone that promised the end of all things sweet. The river surged, higher, faster, black water spilling over the banks. The figures stepped closer, arms stretching toward me, their mouths open, their song now inside my own chest. And as the tide swallowed the last of the bank beneath me, I understood the truth of the voices. They were not calling for salvation. They were calling for another to drown. The song rose around me, low and endless. And for a moment I thought the river had already pulled me under. My boots sank deeper, the mud swallowing my steps, hands stretching from the crimson froth to clutch at my ankles. Their fingers were cold as river stones, slick with rot, and every touch hummed with that same mournful hymn. I wrenched free, stumbling backward, the lantern jerking wild in my grip. Its flame spat, nearly dead, but it gave me just enough glow to see a gap between the trees. I ran. The bank heaved beneath me as if the earth itself tried to drag me back. Roots lashed my legs, branches clawed at my face, and all the while the song followed. Not behind me, but inside me. My lungs pulled it in with each breath, filling me with its rhythm. My heart no longer beat on its own. It marched to the river's dirge. I did not stop running until the woods broke open and the black stretch of road glimmered faintly in the moonlight. I collapsed there, heaving, my body slick with sweat and river stink. The forest behind me was silent, the current muffled, as if none of it had ever happened. But the air still clung sharp with copper, and my tongue carried the taste of rust. When dawn came, I searched again, desperate to prove it real. The river was calm, swollen but ordinary, its banks empty, no copper coils, no barrels, no pale faces singing from the depths. Only water, glittering silver in the morning light. I could almost laugh, almost convince myself it had been a fever dream. Almost. But the smell lingered on my skin, clinging no matter how I scrubbed. And worse, when I finally closed my eyes, sleep dragging me down into uneasy slumber, the song returned. It threaded through my dreams, slow and patient, pulling me back to the riverbank. I tasted it in my sleep, the sour, stagnant water, the iron tang that coated my teeth, the cold slick of unseen hands dragging me down. Each night it grows stronger. The dreams stretch longer. I wake with my throat raw from singing words I do not know, my sheets damp as though I had been pulled dripping from the current. I fled the bank, yes. But the river came with me. And I know, as sure as the mountains stand, that one night I will not wake in my bed. I will wake choking, lungs filled with red froth, my body dragged back to the coils. The river still waits, and it will never stop calling my name. The barn leaned crooked against the hill, its boards gray and sagging, the roof half swallowed by vines. I should have passed it by, but something in the silence made me push the doors open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint bite of old liquor, that sour tang that clings to wood long after the barrels are gone. Broken glass littered the floor, shards catching the light like teeth. Shelves sagged empty, their planks buckled and rotting. Everything had been stripped bare years ago, except for one thing. On a shelf in the farthest corner sat a single jar. It was sealed tight, the cork pressed firm, the glass faintly cloudy with age. The dust on it lay thick, yet the jar itself seemed untouched, its round belly holding a liquid too dark to be shine, too heavy to slosh. It sat proud and certain, as though it had been waiting all these years for someone to find it. For me. I stepped closer, my boots crunching through glass and dirt, the lantern shaking in my grip. The flame painted the jar in trembling light, and for a moment I swore it pulsed. Not the flicker of fire through glass, something deeper, a heartbeat. I held still, breath caught in my chest, listening. The barn groaned in the wind, boards creaking, rafters sighing. And underneath it, soft as a whisper, came a steady thrum, like blood running beneath skin. My hand rose before I thought better of it. The glass was cool, colder than the air should have allowed, damp with a sheen that beaded against my palm. I drew back quick, but the mark lingered on my skin, a faint stain of moisture that smelled metallic, sharp as rust. The barn seemed to close around me. The shadows thickened, the corners pressing tighter, and in the silence, I thought I heard movement. A shuffle, a sigh, the sound of something shifting inside the jar. My lantern flared, and I leaned closer. The liquid inside was not clear, not amber, not the color of any liquor I had ever seen. It was black, deep, and endless, swallowing the light whole. When I tilted my head, the surface rippled, and for an instant, I saw a face. Not my own. Its eyes were closed, its lips parted, drifting as though asleep in the dark. I staggered back, boots crunching, lantern swinging wild, but the jar sat steady, unmoved, waiting. The barn groaned again, louder this time, nails popping in the beams above. Dust rained down, choking the air. And I realized the sound wasn't from the structure at all, it was from the jar. A low, dragging exhale, as if it had just taken its first breath in years. The last jar, alone and sealed tight, untouched by time. And somehow, I knew it had been left for me. The jar sat heavy in the corner, the dust thick on its shelf. But the longer I looked, the less ordinary it became. At first, I thought my lantern was playing tricks, the flame bending shadows against the cloudy glass. But then the lantern guttered low, and still the jar shone faintly on its own. A dim glow leaked from its belly, not bright, not steady, but breathing, alive. The barn around me sank into black, rafters vanishing, the corners swallowed whole, yet that jar remained. Its glow pulsed, soft at first, then stronger like a heart, testing its strength after a long sleep. Each beat sent a ripple through the liquid, faint waves lapping the inside of the glass. The face I had glimpsed before drifted closer, pale in the glow, lips slack, eyelids trembling. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just reflection, just shadow. But when I leaned in, the glow sharpened, and I saw its mouth twitch, a grimace, a whisper of teeth. My own breath stilled as though the jar had claimed the air around it. The boards beneath me creaked. My lantern hissed and died, flames snuffed as though pinched by unseen fingers. The barn should have gone black, but it didn't. The jar lit the room in faint pulses, enough to reveal the broken glass at my feet, the sagging shelves, the dust spinning like ash in the air. And with every pulse, the face in the jar grew sharper, lips curling wider, eyes fluttering open by degrees. I reached out without meaning to, fingers trembling just above the glass. The cold of it bit the air, frost seeping into my skin before I ever touched it. The glow strengthened at my nearness, as if the jar wanted me closer, as if it recognized me. My hand shook, hovering, my veins prickling with pins of ice. Then the face's eyes opened. Not white, not black, but a burning red glow that matched the light spilling from the jar's belly. They locked onto mine through the glass, and though no sound came, I heard it. A voice, low and dragging, curling inside my skull. Not with words I knew, but with a weight that bent my thoughts toward it. My knees buckled. The jar pulsed harder, its glow bleeding against the barn walls, washing the rafters in a red haze. Shadows swam across the boards, wrong shapes that leaned toward me, though nothing stood there. The dust thickened, clogging my throat, but I couldn't cough, couldn't breathe. The face inside the jar smiled then, teeth sharp and endless, and I knew the glow wasn't light at all. It was hunger, and it was waking up. I don't know why I reached for it. Every part of me screamed to leave it there, to shut the barn doors and never look back. But my hands betrayed me. They closed around the glass, and the cold bit deep into my palms. The glow pulsed once, faint but eager, and I lifted it from the shelf. The moment it left its resting place, the barn seemed to exhale. The rafters sagged, the boards groaned, and the dust fell heavy as though the whole structure had been holding its breath until I touched the jar. The glow inside it quickened, a rhythm like a heartbeat pressed against my skin. I stepped out into the night, the air sharp and damp. The jar's weight was strange, heavier than it should have been, as if I carried not liquid, but stone. Yet it was not the steady drag of something solid. It shifted, growing with every step, as though it fed on the distance between the barn and my home. By the time I reached the road, it felt as if I cradled a child in my arms, its weight pulling at my shoulders, pressing against my chest. The glow bled faint through the glass, spilling over my shirt, painting me in red with each throb. I kept my eyes down, afraid to look too long into the liquid. But even in the corner of my vision, I saw movement. Shapes circling inside, faces pressing close to the glass, lips twisting in silent laughter. The woods leaned in along the path, trees crowding closer, their shadows stretched long across the dirt. My lantern had long gone out, but I needed no light. The jar carried its own, pulsing stronger now, bright enough to throw faint shapes across the road. I swore I saw them move. Figures flitting between the trunks, matching my pace, their heads bent low as though listening to the jar's rhythm. My breath grew ragged, my arms numb from the weight. But I could not drop it. It clung to me, fused to my hands, the cold seeping deeper with every mile. The jar wanted to be carried. It wanted to be taken home. By the time my cabin rose from the dark, the weight had doubled again. My knees buckled with every step, sweat streaking my face though the night was cold. The glow now beat steady, strong, like a second heart pressed against my own. The face inside had opened its eyes wide, burning coals that fixed on me through the glass. And when I staggered up my porch steps, its mouth split into a smile. The jar was no longer just heavy with liquid. It was heavy with something alive. And it knew exactly where I lived. I set the jar on the table, but the house did not feel like mine anymore. The glow filled every corner, spilling red across the walls, throbbing in time with the beat of my own pulse. I tried to sit in the dark and steady my breathing, but the silence didn't hold. The whispers began. They rose faintly at first, the scrape of dry leaves, the murmur of creek water over stone. Then they grew sharper, curling from the glass, sliding into the air around me. Promises. That was their shape. They threaded through the room like smoke, winding into my ears, into my head. Drink, they said. Drink and see. Drink and never fear again. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it did no good. The voice was not only outside me, it had already slipped beneath my skin. My mouth grew dry, my throat burning with a thirst that wasn't mine. The jar pulsed brighter on the table, the face inside clearer now, lips parted in a grin that stretched too wide. Its eyes burned, locking on mine, and the whispers grew louder. They told me I would never age, that pain would pass me by, that the mountains themselves would bow if I swallowed what the glass held. They called me by name, slow and tender, as though they had known me before I was born. The face in the liquid laughed soundlessly, but I felt the echo in my bones. The smell grew stronger, metallic and sweet, filling the cabin until I gagged. My hands trembled on the table's edge, my lips cracking from the dryness in my throat. I leaned closer, against all reason, the whispers threading soft and patient through my skull. Drink, they said. Only one sip. The glass glowed so bright, it painted my reflection across the walls. But in that reflection, I was already smiling. The jar waited, and I knew the night would not end unless I gave it my mouth. The whispers swelled until they were no longer words, but a tide of hunger, pressing against my skull, dragging me forward. My throat burned, raw with thirst that was not mine, my hands trembling above the lid. The face inside grinned wider, teeth gleaming, eyes burning like coals in the black. I felt myself lean in, lips parting, and in that moment something deeper than reason took hold. I swung the lantern. Glass exploded across the room, shards scattering like frozen sparks, the glow bursting into a spray of red light before guttering out. The liquid splashed thick across the floorboards, hissing as though alive, seeping into the cracks with a sound like breath leaving a body. The whispers cut off, sharp and sudden, leaving the cabin in silence so heavy it shook my chest. I fell back, gasping, my ears ringing. For a moment, I thought I had won. The glow was gone, the face destroyed, the jar nothing but broken glass gleaming faint in the dying lantern light. I sat there, heart pounding, telling myself it was over. But then, the singing began. Faint at first, so soft I thought it was wind in the eaves. A low hum, rising and falling, threading through the shards scattered across the floor. Each piece glowed faint, not bright like before, but steady, like embers refusing to die. The tune wound through the cabin, curling against the walls, into my ears, into my chest, until my heart stumbled to match its rhythm. I crawled to the corner, covering my ears, but the sound was not outside me anymore. It was inside, threading through my blood, humming in my bones. The shards quivered, rattling on the floorboards, and their glow pulsed in unison. I could not look away. They were singing my name. Every night since, the song has returned. Low, patient, coaxing. The shards hidden beneath the floorboards, under the dirt where I buried them, still glow in the dark, still call through the silence. I smashed the jar before I could drink. But it did not matter. The jar was never meant to be emptied. It was meant to spread. And now its song is waiting for me to answer.